Okay, no mute. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today is going to be part 2 of what we were learning last week, the birth of Moshiach. It's a discourse called in Biurei Hazohar from the Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, which is really the discourses of his father that he recorded. This is in Parshas Balak. Last week we discussed why we're learning it now. It's about the birth of Moshiach. It has something to do with the 33 days between Pesach and Lag Bomer. It's some very deep mysteries about the birth of Moshiach. It's initially a mimer from Tav Kuf Samach Ches. It's also printed in Mamari Admon Azok and Tav Kuf Samach Ches. But we're learning it from, I think it's exactly word for word the same, in Sefer Biurei Hazohar. Over here, we learned already the mimer starts with the words Merosh, Tzurim, Areinu. It's on page 424 in the book Biurei Hazohar. And we learned already the first 4 pages, and we're holding at the bottom of page Reish Yud Daled, which is leading us into page 428. The bottom of page Reish Yud Daled, we're ready to turn over to page 428. I'm not going to repeat what we learned last week. It was a 3-hour class. You can listen. I'll give a little bit of a warning, is that if you think we're going to learn something and understand, I'm telling you now that we won't understand. So I'm not trying to teach something that we will understand. I'm trying to learn and gaze at the mystery of some very, very, very deep and abstract mystical concepts that I have no idea what we're talking about. But I'm making an attempt. At least we're making an attempt. I'm very intrigued by the subject. Obviously, the birth of Moshiach is something that is apropos right now, important right now. We need Moshiach's full revelation in the world. So any little bit of insight that we can get. The mimer is elusive, meaning it's very cryptic, especially certain parts. And if we get some understanding, I'll be happy, and maybe you can be happy. If we don't understand, I'll tell you that I told you so. So, listen on your own risk. I do feel that there is a lot over here that explained what went on 30 years ago in 770. In these weeks, beginning with Chav Ches Nisan, when the Rebbe really shook the world, saying that I'm giving over to you the bringing of Mashiach, and then particularly what he told us this Shabbos, Parshas Tazria and Mashiach 30 years ago, is that the way to help Mashiach's revelation and birth in the world is through studying about Mashiach and the Torah. I think this mimer gives us a lot of insight into why that was the Rebbe's particular request. It also gives us a lot of insight in what has been going on since then in the last 30 years. Again, that's my own take. I admit I understand very little about what's going on over here. I'm trying to figure it out. And I hope in the merit of us learning together, maybe it'll become a little clearer. It is clearer to me now than it was last week. And hopefully by the end of the class today, it'll be even clearer. We're not going to finish this week. We'll need at least 1 or 2 more classes in order to complete the whole discourse. It's a pretty long discourse. Okay. In today's class, we will already come to the part. Last week, we weren't talking at all about the birth of Moshiach. Today, we will. Now, it's connected very much to this week's Parsha because for 2 reasons. For both Parshios, Tazria and Metzora, because Tazria is the Parsha of the woman giving birth, and the Or HaChaim tells us, and Chassidus talks about it, and the Rebbe talked about it on that Shabbos. The ultimate birth that we're talking about is the birth of Moshiach. That is the birth of all births. So this mimer is discussing that birth. What it takes for Mashiach, the great obstacles, and what it takes in order to finally give the final push for Mashiach to be born. It's the biggest resistance fighting the birth of Mashiach. That's number 1. Second thing is the second parsha this week is Metzora, which Metzora is referring again to Mashiach, because Mashiach is considered a leper in the sense that he suffers. There is no person in the world that suffers the pain like Mashiach, because Mashiach's neshama is completely one with the Shekhinah, and the Shekhinah pains the pain of the exile, the collective pain of all pain. Mashiach's neshama is the soul of all of the Jewish people, as we're going to see in the Maimer. the collective soul, on the highest level of collective soul of all of Israel, and completely intertwined with his mother, which is the Shekhinah. And as she suffers away the pain of the exile, Moshiach too, which is the labor pains, Moshiach, the pains of pregnancy and the pains of birth, Moshiach suffers along. The birth of Moshiach is, and that's why Moshiach is called the leper, the birth of Moshiach, which happens in Parshas Tazria, is also what causes the Metzora, the leper, to get out of his leprosy, which means Moshiach to stop suffering. So, and that too is discussed in this discourse. So it's very, very fitting, even though it's not Parshas Tazria, it's not a mimer on Tazria Metzora, but I think it is the whole teichen, the whole content of Parshas Tazria Metzora, and to a very certain degree, I think it gives tremendous insight into the Rebbe's Sicha on Parshas Tazria Metzora 57, 51, where the Rebbe kind of is like begging for help in the birthing of Moshiach. And it's really interesting. Okay. So let's go back. It's a where I am going to read quickly over the Zohar. And again, I don't expect that anybody should understand this mimer if you didn't listen to last week's class. We need the introduction from last week. You can listen today, because again, as I said, there's anyways minimal understanding. But you should learn last week's class called The Birth of Mashiach Part 1. This is Part 2. Okay. This is Psukim referring to when, in the Parsha of Bilam. I'm going to read quickly the Zohar that he's explaining. The Zohar says on the pasuk, Merosh Tzurim Areinu, on the top of mountains I see him. And from the hilltops or from the valleys, Asherenu, I behold the Jewish people. It's Bilam saying how he sees the Jewish people. So the Zohar says, when it says, on the tops of mountains I see him, the Zohar says that mountains are referring to their father. Rashi also explains it that way. And Megava'os, which generally is understood as hills, but as we discussed last week, Megava'os can also mean valleys, is referring to our mothers. So in the simple meaning, Bilam is saying that the Jewish people are firmly founded on fathers and mothers, and therefore I can't destroy them. The deeper meaning and the mystical level that the Zohar is saying is that Israel, the root of the Jewish souls, which is we down here, all souls together, are born, as we're soon going to see, from the Shekhinah. So we're a child from the Shekhinah. But our mother is the Shekhinah. Our father is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu is really the root of Israel. It's called Yisrael, which is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu represents the concept of the 6 sfirot, the 6 attributes. Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, that's Israel in its sublime source. Now, what Bilam is saying, the reason he can't harm us is because really the Jewish people, which is Israel, which is the supernal Sefirot of the Ze'er Anpin, are rooted even higher than the Ze'er Anpin. I see them already in Chachma and Bina. That's what we learned last week. And he traces the child within the father and the mother. So that's what the Zohar is saying. I see him on the top of the mountains, the form and the image of the Father is imprinted on him. And we learned last week, I'm just going to say very briefly, how the Ze'er Anpin, which are the Midos, are already very vaguely present in Chachma, but almost non-existent, but yet it's there already. But when Chachma transmits the Midos, transmits to the seminal drop, so to speak, of the child to the mother, over there is already what happens. Mesitr de la ismatach. From there, it already expands, and he explains the difference of a child. The image of a child is already there in a very abstract, concealed state in the droplet that comes from the father, but you can't really see a child in it. It's there, but in a very hidden, non-identity state, in a state of ayin, in a state of nothingness yet. When there is conception in the mother, there's already a whole fetus. Now the fetus is hidden in the mother, like we learned last week. The fetus is hidden in the mother, but yet it's developing as a fetus, as an existence, as an entity. So spiritually the same is also. The divine emotions are first in a concealed, almost non-existent state in Chachma. In Bina, it becomes far more an entity. And what happens? Mesitr de la itmatach, from in her side, itmatach means more it develops. V'oshet psia labar yatir, and he's already sticking his foot out. And the Zohar we learned last week, that's the meaning of ashurenu. Ashurenu comes from the word tamoich ashurai, which is feet. In other words, what's mostly present in the baby, in the fetus, is its feet. So we learned last week, a fetus, in the fetal position, is folded up in three. And what's most visible is the feet, the head, the torso, kind of folded into the feet. What that means is that the midot, the emotions that are present in the fetus, is just the practical emotion, and not so much the higher parts of the emotions, which are he refers to, the emotions as having chabad, chagas, nehim. Chabad are the three intellectual elements of the emotions, what's called moichen de gadlus. Then there is the chagad of the emotions, which are the chesed, gevurah, teferes, which is moichen de katnos, but it's still an element of mochen. And then there is the feet of the emotions, which are the nehim, netzachod yesod of the emotions, which are the lowest part of the emotions. The more the emotion as just the bare emotion. So while the emotions of the Ze'er Anpin are still in the Bina, what's mainly present over there is or noticeable and kind of already in existence, is the netzachod yesod of the emotion. After the child is born, and that's what it means, oishet psia labar. Two things he brings out. Number one, the child, the fetus in this state is already far more a pronounced existence as opposed to in the father. So over there it's not yet out, it's still one, it's completely hidden. Now it emerges out as an entity. And then afterwards, once the child is born, then the mother nurses the child. The nursing of the child produces and develops the chagas of the midos. In emotions and a human experience, it means, again, I'm just going through, please don't expect to understand from this, because it's not fair for me, to those who listened last week, to rechew everything. So I'm just simply going quickly over the idea, just to refresh the memories of those who listened last week. And those who didn't, again, listen to last week's share, and then you'll listen to this week's. Okay, just making that clear, because I know that I'm not going to make any sense to those that are just tuning in now to a new class, because it's a continuation. The moichem de katnos is the nursing, and what that means to emotions is that when a child is born, you have essential core natural emotions, instinctive emotion. Some children are born with more tendencies to kindness, others are more tendent to discipline and to harshness, different emotions that people have. And when you're very young, just as a baby, they're just a pure emotion, just in its natural state. The nursing stage represents the childhood state when you're being nurtured, which means you're adding more understanding to the emotion, so the emotions can grow and appreciate more. So a kind person appreciates more intellectually why kindness is good. And as a result of that, it brings a very big expansion to the emotion. The kindness grows into more valuable form of kindness, and it becomes more intense, and so on and so forth. That's called, but it's still called moichen de katnos, because the type of influence, what it's doing is, it's taking the kindness that's already there and just giving it more, fleshing it out, giving it more oomph, more energy, more justification, more of a reason. And as a result of that, it intensifies what is already, it develops it. And then there is a higher form of influence called moichen de gadlus. That's when the real Chabad kicks in, where real objective kind of knowledge kicks in. And what that does is it's able to lift the emotions up completely from an emotion to become a form of a philosophy, a form of life. And then it can become a very, very intellectual kind of a giving. And then it's not even so much emotional anymore. It's not much you're triggering someone's emotions. A person can be a real giver, but the giver is mainly a giving of reason. It's more about ideas. It's still going to be the emotions, but it's like they completely change and metamorphosize into a kind philosophy as opposed to just an excitement. And therefore it's harder in a sense to trigger that emotion anymore because the person has much more control over it. So people that are good people and they're philanthropists and they like to give, when they reach a certain maturity of giving, they'll give, and quite intentionally they'll be giving much more, but it's very discriminative. You can't just play on their emotions. As opposed to when it's still in an emotion state, you just have to stimulate the emotion and there is the giving of it. That's the idea of the emotion growing, which happens later. But here we're talking about the stage of the emotions while they're still in the Chachma and in the Bina, and in that, all you have is the feet. And that's the meaning of Oishet Psia Labar Yatir. Then he explains the pasuk. When I see it in the father, I see this Eir Anpin in the father, means that's where the child is still in the brain of the father. When it goes into the womb of the mother, Asherenu. Oishet Psia Labar, Kegavne Da Taf. Where do you see Oishet Psia Labar? This is important for today's class. There is in Bina is a hey. Now the real Bina itself is the Dalid of the Bina. Because what's Bina? Bina is taking the point. Chachma is a Yud, is a point. Bina takes that point and expands. The expansion is vertical and horizontal and vertical. Then in addition to that, there is another leg inside the hay. What's that leg? The leg is already not the intellect, the intelligence. The father gives the mother. The idea is Chachma passes to Bina a concept. Bina develops it, the left side of the brain. Develops it. And quietly inside of it, Bina becomes pregnant. The pregnancy is already, what's the pregnancy? The pregnancy is the emotion that's in it. And that's the little leg. That's the Vav of the 6 emotions. In response to the idea, now you get excited about the idea. Now, the excitement is still in a pregnancy, is still in a fetus state, which means we're not yet feeling a full-fledged emotion and excitement. The excitement and the emotion is still brewing in the mind. That's why it's a Vav. But the bottom of the Vav has a foot sticking out. The hay, it's in the shape of a Yud. So it's sticking out. What does that mean? That means that there is already in other words, the as we spoke earlier, the feet of the emotion is already noticeable. It's already extending outward. That's the idea. So the concept over here that the Zohar is talking about is that how the levels of the 6 divine emotions, as they forge in Chachma and in Bina, and as they're ready to emerge outward. And then they're in a very high state. Okay. V'dahu, and this is the meaning, Geva'is Asherenu. I can already see him in the Geva'is in the valley. Fine. But then it continues. B'mesifta ilah, in the higher Mesifta. U'megivas chaser vav. When you look in the Chumash, you see that the word Geva'os, which is referring to the valleys, in our case, referring to the mother, which is Bina. The higher Mesifta says, according to it, meaning Mesifta means the academy above, in some very high spiritual level, over there, the opinion is that this word in the Torah is supposed to be written without a Vav. Give us. Now, when you look in Chumash, you see it with a Vav. Now, probably because the reason we see it with a Vav is because we're learning it down here, after it has already been channeled down through the lower Mesifta. As he's going to explain, the Zohar says there's 2 academies. There's the higher academy called Academy of Law, and then there is the lower academy called Mesifta Dirakia, the firmament. It's a lower level of academy. In the lower academy, you're supposed to read Givaois with a Vav. Like sometimes you find, even in Chumash, a word that it's written like this and it's read like this. You find that. So here it seems like, I don't know anywhere where it says where you can find it other than in Zohar, that there's two pronunciations to this word, Givas or Givois. Again, in our Chumash, there's no hint to it. It's written with a Vav. But the Zohar is saying that in Mesifti Allah, it's supposed to be Givas. Why? Ramah de Koila, that's the high level. Ahi Allah de Koila, the level that's above all. We'll soon see. Today we're going to discuss that. That's today's Pirush. That's today's commentary we're going to learn. However, in the firmament in the academy of the firmament, over there, Migvah is ba'azvav. Over there, you pronounce Givaot, Givaois with a vav. Why? So the Zohar says, because va'ashlim letrein sitrin, because it's completed in two sides. What does that mean? Again, let's leave it for a little later. But let's just see. The reason why the Givaois needs to have a vav is because it's referring to two. Now, truth is, I'll add a little commentary. The difference between Givas and Givaois is Givas, besides the fact that Givas is without a vav and Givaois is with a vav, is of how many valleys are we talking about? Givas without a vav is one valley. Givas, like you have the place called Givat Shaul, the valley of Shaul. Givat, one Givat, or the hill of Shaul. Givaot is plural. That means two Givaois. So in the hierarchy, in the higher academy, it's supposed to be Giva singular. In the lower academy, it's in the plural. Why? Because in the lower academy, they're saying that when it says that Bilam is saying, I see, Asherenu, I see him, which, as we said before, is the emergence of a baby. The emergence of the baby is from two mothers, from two Givaois. Who are the two mothers? Number one is this Giva, which is referring to the higher mother, the higher one. She never separates from her son. She doesn't leave him. That's why the Vav is inside of her. It's interesting, in the Maimer so far, the part that I learned, and it seems like he won't speak about it later, he doesn't seem to make much about this little passage of Zohar now, doesn't seem to give much commentary on this Nekuda, that the Vav is there because the mother never separates from the son. Okay, I'm going to try to come back to that soon a little bit later so that you understand what I mean that he's not talking about it. I don't know why. But the main Nekuda that he is talking about is that the reason there is Giva'os Giva'os with a Vav is because it's plural, two births, two mothers. The Chad so again, the first one is Bina giving birth to the six emotions, the Ze'er Anpin. The second one, the Chad and one, the Giva de Latata, is referring to the lower valley. Remember last week we spoke that the male is called mountain, a protrusion. Female is called valley. So there is the higher valley and the lower valley, which are the two hays of God's name. Bina and Malchus. The lower valley also has a pregnancy. And what pregnancy is that? The child who is included and embedded in her, is going to need help. Now here, again, I'm adding a lot of word over here already to make it a little bit more understandable. The lower mother, the lower pregnancy, or the pregnant woman that's lower, the daughter, which is Malchus, is going to need help from the higher valley. Will need Lazimna Da'ase in the future. When? Kadyese Malka Mashiach. When Moshiach is about to come. So she will need, the lower mother will need help from her mother. Malchus will need assistance from Bina. Lenat lelei, give us ilah, that the higher valley, which is Bina, should take her son, which is Moshiach, and lift Moshiach up into her, or as we're going to see soon, birthing assistance from the mother to help her daughter have a child. How? Ula'alalei, because she has to lift him up, goy gatfa, under her wings. Begin, for what purpose? La'askaf alei, to strengthen him. Ula'oikam alei, and to stand him up. B'chayin ilan, with higher life. To infuse in him higher life. Because his life is in jeopardy. A higher infusion of life is going to come from the higher mother, from Bina. And from her will come out, whether from her is the lower mother, or from her is the combination of the lower mother and the higher mother, Mashiach ben David is going to be born. And this is what he's saying, Areinu, I see him. Who is he referring to? Bilam had eyes, can see very far. He's referring to the ultimate birth, which both mothers together, the higher mother and the lower mother, are going to participate in this birthing process to bring Mashiach forth. Done. This is the secret of what it says in Tehillim, Psalm number 2, Tehillim Perek Beis. Over there it's talking about the birth of Mashiach. Bechlal, it's talking about the war of Gog and Magog, the whole fight that's going on right before Mashiach comes, which, by the way, we are now currently living through this whole process. It says over there, Asapra, I will relate, El Choik. Simply, I think it means, I will relate that it should be written down. It should be engraved. It should be written down. But he's going to give soon a much deeper interpretation. That Asapra El Choik means the higher mother illuminating into the lower mother, a certain communication, a certain infusion of assistance from Bina to Malchus, as we're going to see soon. Sapra el Choik, Malchus is referred to as Chok. Bina is now delivering great dosages of energy into Malchus. For what purpose? For the birth of Mashiach. Hashem Omer Alai, Havaya says to me. What that means we're going to see soon in this context. That Havaya says to me, Bini Ata, you're my child. Who's this? Mashiach Tzedkenu. That's what the Gemara learns. This pasuk is referring to Mashiach. Hashem says to Mashiach, you are my child. Ani hayom lidatecha, I've given birth to you today. And how does that birth take place? Asapra el Choik. The higher valley is assisting the lower valley. Zamen anoloimar, I will in the future say, Lahu asar di ikra Choik, to that place that's called Chok. We'll soon see that's the lower mother, that's Malchus, why she's called Choik. He talks about it in the Maimer. Well, the Vasrele, I'm going to bring a Besura. What's the Besura? I'm going to bring good news. Bahu yoyma mamish yapikle. On that day, literally, Hahu Choik, Choik, which is Malchus, will then bring forth Mashiach. The Shechina will give birth to Mashiach. Mit Chois katfa, from under her wings. Bekama chayin, with many, but he's now going to emerge with a lot of life. Bekama itrin, with many crowns. Bekama birchan, with many blessings. Kedekayos, this is the ultimate birth, like it should be. Now it says, Vahi choik, Vahu choik, and this choik, which is the Shechina, which is Lo yishtar bilch, and it seems like not just the Shechina, but the birth who is being birthed by the Shechina, which is Mashiach's neshama. Lo yishtar bilchadoi, will at that moment not remain alone. Yiskal al-Bey, it will be included in him, Mashiach Achra, another Mashiach, Biurei de Yosef, the son of Yosef. In this case, it almost implies a certain joining of forces of Mashiach ben David with Mashiach ben Yosef, which will happen after the birth of Mashiach ben David. Interesting idea. Mashiach ben David is born already spiritually, which means there's a certain and birth of Mashiach means a revelation of Mashiach's neshama in the world. In other words, that people know that this person is Mashiach. Meaning, Mashiach is already is present in the world during the time of pregnancy. It's not like a pregnancy that's taking place somewhere in the neshama in Gan Eden. Mashiach is present in the world during the time of pregnancy, and that's why he's suffering. And from the Maimer it comes out, that's what's so intriguing to me, is that there is an entire period of time that Mashiach is here in the world, but his main Mashiach soul is still in a state of being hidden inside the Shekhinah. In other words, while he's alive, his neshama, his Mashiach side of his neshama, which is the bulk of his soul, is still in a state of fetus within the Shekhinah. And at that point, he's suffering tremendously the pain of the Jewish people, and the pain of the Shekhinah, and the pain of the exile. But then there is a birth. And that now Mashiach has been born. But what happens? He came out with many crowns, with many blessings, with many inyonim. There's a certain leidah, there's a certain isgalus. Now, after that, Moshiach ben Yosef becomes included in Moshiach ben David. V'tamon yistokaf. And over there he will become very firm, very strong. V'loy basar achra, not in another place. In that place he will become strong. Who will become strong? Moshiach ben David will become strong because he has now Moshiach ben Yosef to strengthen him? Or Moshiach ben Yosef will become strong because he has Moshiach ben David? I'm not clear. There will be some kind of a strengthening as a result. But, begin the ihu givatata the leis b'chayim. But since she is the lower valley, that means the birth, Soif Kol Soif, happened even after the birth. That's what it's mashma from the Maimer. See, again, this is what implies from the discourse that we're soon going to learn. Because even after the birth came from the lower valley, which is a place where there is no life, the Leis B'chayin, there is no life. We're soon going to see there's a certain moment of lifelessness in the Shekhinah that's giving birth to Mashiach. Frightening ideas. It has to do with the fact that when a woman gives birth, there is warmth in her body. Warmth is life. But right at the moment of pre-birth, her thighs become cold. That's a certain lifeless moment in the thighs. What that does and what that means spiritually regarding Mashiach is there's a certain disconnect for a moment of life. Because of this, Yamis Mashiach da. This Mashiach will die. The iskatl. And he will be killed, whatever that means. So it's talking about some kind of a passing away, some kind of a death of Mashiach. After he becomes combined with Mashiach ben Yosef. The aim is he will remain in this state of the opposite of life. Ad tilkoit chayin givada mahai givela. Until we can recommunicate the two giva'os, the lower valley with the higher valley. V'yikum, and then he will get up. It's a mystery, obviously. Now, I don't claim that I understand this. And again, obviously now I don't understand anything as we're reading just from here. The Zohar is talking extremely cryptic. When we're going to learn the Maimer, we'll have more clarity, but even then I don't claim that I understand it. But I can just tell you what I am feeling. What makes sense to me. Again, to me it seems like the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, again, it's clear to me, claimed in his teachings, in Tafshin Nun Aleph and in Tafshin Nun Beis, I'm not making this, I'm just telling you what the Rebbe said, that's the year Mashiach ben David is going to be revealed. The Rebbe said that. I'm not talking about some hocus pocus, guy living in a cave somewhere, or some guy who has what's it called again, hallucinations that he's Mashiach. I'm talking about the leader of world Jewry, the person who single-handedly built up the entire Jewish people after the Holocaust. The person who has the biggest Jewish following and inspiration of Torah and mitzvahs in the world to reach and to inspire Jews, and every day his influence is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. We're talking about a tzaddik kadosh elyon that knew kol ha-Torah kula and Torah secrets from every element of Torah like no one before. So that's what we have to bear in mind. So when we say that the Rebbe said, there's no hocus pocus over here. This is serious business. So that the Rebbe said, and if you learn, you can not take my word for it. Take the Parshas Tazria and Mashiach that the Rebbe spoke in 57, 51 about the birth of Moshiach this week, and learn it. And over there itself, and coupled with all the other talks, but this one is extremely powerful. Clearly the Rebbe is indicating, and if you know what happened by that Fabringen, that the people came and gave the Rebbe a few days before that a psak-din that he's Moshiach. And at that Fabringen, they went up and they announced for the first time, they proclaimed the proclamation of the Rebbe being Moshiach. And the whole sikha was a sikha of the difficulty of the birth of Moshiach. The Rebbe is dealing with the problem over there. How can we, that now is the time that Mashiach has to be nizgala. But there's some kind of an obstacle. Okay. So it would seem like that whole, and again, Chassidim were reeling from the most shocking talk ever in the end of Chodesh Nisan, Chav Ches Nisan, where the Rebbe then expressed himself, how he's done whatever he can, and now it's up to us. So there was, to many people, it felt almost like the Rebbe is resigning. We're shocked, shock. I think that what we're learning in Zohar over here, and this commentary that we're going to learn, is actually expressing what was going on during that time. And the birth of Mashiach in this world, the hisgalus of Mashiach in this world, happened, whether that Fabringen, whether that period of time, it's hard to point. But I believe that that was the birth of Mashiach in this world. What did the Rebbe ask of us at that time? He said, we should learn Torah, Rebbe Omer, Ezehu Derech Yeshua, we should learn Torah in Inyanei Mashiach and Geula. What are we learning over here in the Zohar? That for Mashiach's birth to take place, you need to have a hashpah from Bina into Malchus. So again, Yesh Loimar, again, I can't say for sure because I don't know. We're dealing with deep mysteries. But again, what I am feeling, what I am sensing, I learned these two things in the same week, is it seems like there's a lot of explanations why the Rebbe said we should learn it. We should be inspired. We should be determined. There's a lot to explain it on the level of pshat. What I'm saying on the level of sod, if we want to get into a deep mystical idea of why the Rebbe was asking that we should all study in Yanei Mashiach and Geula to help reveal Mashiach in the world, Yesh Lomar, that it's associated with what said us over here. That there has to be, and it's going to be clearer when we learn in the Maimer, there has to be an infusion, a powerful infusion from Bina to Malchus to help Malchus give birth. Now, the Rebbe revealed that. And after that came three powerful sichas. That one and the week after, all about the whole idea of Mashiach is that it's the Aleph, Goyla, in Geula. That's really the revelation of Mashiach in this world. It's the whole deepest understanding of what Geula is. That it's not a new thing. It's uncovering the truth of exile. The Aleph in the Goyla. It's incredible what was going on in the teachings that happened thereafter. Unbelievable things. During this whole time, there was a collection of signatures, and people were giving it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was encouraging that more of it should be done. The Rebbe sent shluchim then out to the. I mean, it wasn't initiated by the Rebbe, but the people initiated it, and the Rebbe was very, very, very strongly encouraging it that they went and they read the Psak Din of Cheskas Mashiach by all the oils of the previous Chabad Rabbeim, and by the Arizal later, and by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. I think by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai too, Merosh. I know by the Arizal. They read the Psak Din. I mean, something mystical was going on, very powerful, during this whole period of time. So that was revelation. That was his Galus Nishmas Mashiach, Leda. The Zohar says after that, again, I'm just suggesting as a possibility. I do not know. The Rebbe traveled in Chodesh Adar, he kept on going, but he was going to the oil of his father-in-law. Now his father-in-law, we all know, his name is Yosef, Friediger Rebbe. And the Rebbe keeps on referring to interchangeable to him as Moshiach and his father-in-law, Yosef Yitzchak, and himself as Menachem. Even in this sikh of Parshas Tazria and Mashiach, the Rebbe is talking about Menachem ben Chizkiyahu, about the Mashiach's name, Menachem and Agan Samais. So who is it? Father-in-law, him. But again, the mashmois that I am getting, and again, I am already, till now people are afraid to talk. Everybody's afraid, but he's uncomfortable, this, that, these things are emes, they're true, and there's no point of being uncomfortable or this or that. Nechze Sefer, let's look in the Svarim, let's look at what it says, and see what was said, what was not said, and make up your mind. This whole idea of being uncomfortable and not talking, what happened? The signatures were going on, the yechi was going on, the encouragement was going on. The sichos were said about Leidas Mashiach, explicit statements that Mashiach is already present and he's here, and references to himself non-stop, not just little hints, but the whole content of the sichos were all expressing the idea of Melech HaMashiach, and how he's, that it's the 7th Rebbe or the 9th Rebbe, and they went on and on and on and on. There's not no secret. It's a secret if people try to hide it. It's a secret. But if we go back to it and read it objectively, we see clearly that the Rebbe was driving this. And to me, the Rebbe is emes and true and didn't hope, and it was all clear statements. With the Zohar, things make a lot of sense. The Zohar says there has to be some kind of a chibur of the two Mashiachim after Mashiach is born. It seems like that end of Nisan and that whole painful cry of the Rebbe then, it was almost like that final labor pain, that final and then came Leidas Nishmas Mashiach, right at that time. After, at the conclusion of the year, there seems to be a fusion. The Zohar says over there, they become strong. Not anywhere else. Where did the Rebbe go? To his father-in-law. And over there is where the Rebbe had a stroke. Can that be the unification of both Mashiach into one? Rabbi Volpe and Sefer Yechia Melech HaMashiach proves it from many, many sources that there is a chibur, that Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David doesn't have to be two people. It's a fusion of one person. We all know, and Chabad Rabbeim avoided speaking about it. There's almost no talk in Chabad Chassidus about the passing and the death of Mashiach ben Yosef. But Soif Kol Soif, we had what happened on Gimel Tammuz, which seems to be related to what the Zohar says specifically over here. Then it says that this condition continues for a while, until he gathers again Chai and Ilah, and until there is again a fusion of Bina and Malchus. There's some kind of a fusion again. Maybe it has to do with us today redetermining, reinvesting, re-infusing ourselves in learning in Yanei Geula Mashiach to connect Bina and Malchus together. And that brings about the Yakum, that Mashiach gets up again. The Alter Rebbe in the Maimer associates his resurrection and coming back again, and this fusion and this something to do, and again it's very cryptic and I don't understand what, where, and when, with the 33 days from Pesach until Lag BaOmer. It has to do with 33 days of the woman giving birth, discussed in this week's parsha. And during that time, she sits b'demei tahara in her pure blood, that her blood is not tummy. Can we be awaiting something this Lag BaOmer? I say absolutely not, because I say Mashiach now, today. We can't wait till Lag BaOmer. Is there some kind of a secret? Which Lag BaOmer? What, where, and when? I don't know. I'm just intrigued by the subject, trying to put hands and feet together. On the one hand, we can argue and say, we have no idea what the Zohar is talking about, and therefore don't even make any attempts. I don't know. I can't tell you for sure this is it. But I can definitely, what I will say is I think it definitely is related to what's going on if I haven't diagnosed it perfectly, which maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I don't know. Because again, it's cryptic and it's not that clear, but there's definitely something here. That's all I can say. Okay. So now let's go back to where we were holding how did we suddenly get into the whole birth of Mashiach? Is that we're talking about a certain birthing that takes place of the divine presence in the world. Earlier we were talking about the birth of the divine midot, which is God, and which is so important because it's through the structure of God being, through the sfirot of Atzilus, through the attributes of Atzilus, this is through which the Eibishter manifests himself first in the supernal realms, and then further down in creation. So first we're talking about the birth of Israel in Atzilus, and then we're talking about the birth of Mashiach, which is a birth taking place on a lower level. It's a birth of Malchus. So you got to ask yourself, which is obviously a good question, like Malchus doesn't give birth until the birth of Mashiach. How is the universe born? We know Malchus is a source of creation. So what's the chiddush over here? What's the novelty? What's this progression into the birth of Mashiach's neshama? Why dafke Mashiach is the birth of Malchus? So what I think, again, also not so clear in the Maimer, but the way I understand it is as follows. Yes, of course, from Malchus there is creation, there are worlds, but there is no complete divine manifestation within this world, in the lower three worlds, in Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, and definitely not in the world of Asiya, in the same way like there is in Atzilus. To a certain degree, yes, because Avram Avinu was a chariot to one midah. So when Avram Avinu was alive, there was a hisgalus of midas chesed in this world. When Yitzchak Avinu was alive, there was his galus of midas gvura in the physical world. We had a physical incarnation that was facilitating the divine attribute. And in a sense, when all three were alive, there were 15 years that all three were alive, we had Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes all manifested. But we never had Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, everything fully present in the world at one time. Moshiach Tzidkenu is going to be the complete manifestation of all these spheres, the same divine manifestation that takes place in the divine realm above creation, in the higher realms, is then going to find expression ba'olam hazeh hagashmi, in the material physical world, through the guf gashmi of Mashiach Tzidkenu, who's going to come. So when we speak about this birthing of Mashiach, it's the next stage of the hisgalus of the Ze'er Anpin. Ze'er Anpin is already considered a son, a child, and this is considered almost like the grandchild of the Orein Sof. There's the Orein Sof. The Avaya Shebechachma, the godliness that's in Chachma. The whole point over here is that the Eibishter wants to have a dira, wants to have a home in this world. That means he manifests within creation. So he manifests first in the Sfirot of Atzilus, stage number 1. And then there is going to be the child of the Ze'er Anpin, like he explains in the Maimer, which comes through a fusion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the Ze'er Anpin, in his marriage with the Shechina. The Shechina becomes pregnant. Really, it's all of our souls that are born of that pregnancy. All of the souls of Israel are all the projection of the Eibishter into this world, but there is one general soul that represents all souls of Israel. And when he is revealed in this physical world, he brings forth the divine dimension in all of our neshamas, that we can all be divine beings in this world. And that's the birth of Moshiach. So that's the next stage of that birth. Birthing godliness into Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, that happens through Malchus. And that's what why we're so concerned with this birth. It's the ultimate birth. It's bringing the Eibishter down into this world through each and every one of us, as being part of the Neshama Kalelis, and the Neshama Kalelis is the Neshama of Mashiach. That's sort of what I'm getting when we're learning this. So now, let's go back into the Maimer. Earlier in the Maimer, we were talking about how the Mashiach, how the Neshama, the first level of Israel, the Jewish people as we are in Atzilus, the Ze'er Anpin is born. So we learned how first it exists in Chachma, very vague, more pronounced than Bina. So much so that in Bina it's called Areinu. It's already sticking its foot out. Now he's going to learn a different pirush in sticking its foot out. That the lashon over there is oishit psia labar, sticking the foot out outside. He's going to say that that's not referring so much to the midos itself becoming an identifiable existence in Bina, but more associated with Malchus, the birth of Malchus in Bina. That Malchus itself first exists in Bina. That's the oishit. In other words, because the Ze'er Anpin is both the male and the female of the Ze'er Anpin is Malchus. So as Malchus develops, which are the emotions, also Malchus, which is speech, is also in a very subtle way already emerging in Bina. Okay, and then later we're going to learn how Malchus herself now creates a child, which is Moshiach, which is born further into creation. When we're talking about the emergence of divinity, lower and lower, more into existence from above it all. We still need added explanation. Inyan psia labar, this idea of stepping out. Hanal, the hine mevur lamayla, it is explained earlier. Inyan psia labar, with the stepping out. Dekai al b'chinas vav k'tzav is the za'atzman. It's referring to the. Earlier we said that it's the Psia Labar is the 6 sides of the Ze'er Anpin themselves, Haklulim Bebina, that are included in Bina. Shu regel HaKotzer shebeheirei shoyna. That is, remember we said earlier that in the Dalid of the hay, there is the Dalid itself, and then there is the small leg of the hay. V'amnam b'soif zu regel, and we learned that in the end of this foot, of this leg, Oishet Psia Labar, she sticks her foot out. That's the part that you see the most. Remember we spoke earlier how the 3 nether parts, the netzach hod yesod of the Ze'er Anpin, the feet of the fetus, is the most noticeable. Shaboy haniglim b'hiyoisai gimel goy gimel. When it's 3 folded up, as the Zohar, as the Gemara says, or the Zohar says, the child is folded in 3 in the fetal position. So the part that's the most visible and the most pronounced is the feet. This pirush is not fully settled in the words of the Zohar. According to the words of the Maimer of the Zohar. The mashma, it implies that it implies that the vav k'tzavos, the 6 directions of the Ze'er Anpin, that are included in Bina, Oishet Psia Labar, is sticking her foot out. It's mashma, it sticks its foot out of the Ze'er Anpin. Pirish levar ma'atzmusa, not outside. See, we were learning till now, it's emerging out. Lebar means outside of Bina. In other words, it's like the baby is submerged in the mother. But the fact that the baby is protruding out, which is primarily related to the feet of the child, is kind of an indication of a going out, that there is someone outside of the mother there. In other words, it's indicating an otherness already. But it would be outside of the mother. For some reason, the Alter Rebbe is not happy with that explanation, Oishet Psia Labar, that it means outside of the mother. It means outside of the child himself. Oishet Psia Lavar means not regarding the Dalid of the hay, but regarding the Vav of the hay, which is the bottom, Labar outside of it. So he's asking a question. If it would be referring to the feet, the Netzach Hod Yesod is still considered part of the Zeir Anpin. It's not outside of the Zeir Anpin. Harei B'chinas Netzach Hod Yesod shaboy, the Netzach Hod Yesod of it, Nechshav Meb'chinas Atzmusei al Kapanim, is still considered part of the Zeir Anpin. Ela Pirish Amiti, the real Pirish of the Psia Zois, of this stepping out, Asher Oishit Zeir Anpin Zo, Lebar Ma'atzmusei, that is sticking out of himself, Hu B'chinas Nukva de Zo. That's referring to the Nukva, the Malchus of the Zeir Anpin. That's already considered a separate being. Like Chava is not part of Adam. Maybe she's attached to him, but she's still a separate entity. It's almost like, see, when Zeir Anpin is born, he's born with a twin sister. Included in him is already Malchus. Even when he's still within the mother in a fetal state, he's already has a wife. He's already with his bashert. She's also part of him there. Which is not just the vav. See what I was saying is the vav, before the vav of Yud K Vav K. Because what happens after the hey is Bina? There's a vav. But that vav is first included in the hey. That's the remember we spoke last week how the hey is included in the Yud. And the vav is included in the hey. Before the vav goes out to become its own thing. But now he's saying not only is the vav included in the hay, but in the bottom of the vav is already the hay, the next emergence, because from the vav comes the hay, so the hay is also included in the vav. Shenikra b'chenes Divrei Elyon, which is called the supernal speech, as she is still included in her source, Bina and Bina, his source and her source, Bina and Bina, Shuhei Elah, which is the higher hay, the Shem Havaya. Notice the lower hay is still embedded in the higher hay. Sharaya Bina, because Bina is called Nikra'im Habonim. It's called the mother of children, male and female. Like this week in the Parsha, Isha ki Tazria, a woman gives birth, V'yolda Zohar, and then it says she gives birth to a boy, Im Nekeva Te'elet, she gives birth to a girl. So the boy is the Zeir Anpin, the girl is Malchus. The Yedua Pirish, Tavuna. And it is known in the Pirush of the word Tavuna. Remember, we learned last week that Bina has two levels. Bina is in a higher state, she's called Bina. That's when she's just a wife to, we'll make reference to it soon. She's still just a wife to Chachma. And then there's a second stage of Bina where she becomes pregnant and a mother to her children. Then she's not called Bina, she's called Tavuna. Because Tavuna also means understanding, but it already includes the words Ben and Bas in it. Perish Tavuna oisi is Ben ubas. There is a son and a daughter. That means Malchus is also there. Shehen Zun. Zuchre Nukva bihi yoisan, when they are still bebet and ema within the womb of the mother. Bet and ema law in the womb of the mother. Like it says, Va'achar, regarding Leah. Leah sometimes is the reference for Bina, that she gives birth to 6 boys. Those are the 6 emotions. And after she gave birth to a girl, which is Dina. V'achar yolda bas. V'nikra shema Dina, and her name is Dina. Dina, and what's Dina referring to? Malchus. That's why it's called Dina de Malchus. The Dina of Malchus. Which, by the way, explains also the whole story that happened to Dina. That she gets raped and the whole thing. Because we know that's what happens with Malchus during the time of exile. Malchus is raped by the clipa. Which means that's the idea that the snake has relations with Chava. It's all the same idea. Dina and Chava, same concept. Malchus is vulnerable for attack, because as we're going to learn later, and that's the whole idea of the galus, of the Shekhinah, and the pain and the suffering, is all because the Chitzonim, the powers of the Chitzonim, because Malchus is the closest to the creation, they attack. They want to siphon the energy. It's all part of it. Dina de Malchus, v'zeu she'amar ki ima kabita, like mother, like daughter, she'amalchus nikra bas le'ima ilah. Malchus is called the bas. V'hu b'chenes ha'psiya lebar. And when we say that there is already stepping out, that's already Malchus. Because Malchus is already considered a separate entity. In the Hey Rishayna, in the first Hey of Shem Havaya, this is indicating al shoirish machzav, on the root of the excavation, mitzias nukvedazah, of the existence of the nekeva, of the female of the Zeir Anpin, hanikra b'chinas diburei elyon, which is called the supernal speech, ki yidua as it is known. And the explanation of these words. It is explained up higher, earlier. Last week we discussed how the midos are included in Bina. Over there they're already beginning to emerge, the beginning of their mitzias, be'etzem, in essence. Rak sheklulim bebina, but they are included in Bina, behelim gadol. Remember, we learned that in Chachma you can hardly tell the excitement. In Bina you can already sense the excitement, but it's still part of the mother. It's still there. But he says, he's going to differentiate over here that remember, there is Yud K, Vav K. So what's closer to the Hey, the first Hey? The Vav. So the Vav exists, the 6 boys exist in the mother in a more noticeable existence than the sister, the Dina, which is the Malchus. Malchus also exists in Bina, but since Malchus only emerges later after the Vav, the existence of Malchus in Bina is more hidden than the existence of the boys of the 6 emotions as they are in Bina. The emotions are more detectable in Bina than it has to do maybe with the idea that when Hashem created Adam Arishon, Adam was created. So who was born? Adam. In Adam was Chava. So Chava is like a rib in him. So she's less pronounced. It'll take more work, a separate work, to cause her to emerge. So in the intellect, for example, when you understand something, the excitement of the understanding is more pronounced than what will the excitement lead to? When you're excited, you'll talk. Then the words, then the communication, and the expression. Even though the words are there, but they're even more subtle, they're more hidden in this stage, because it's still pre their existence, as opposed to the excitement, which is already just pre the excitement. The real emotion is only after there's a full-fledged emotion. But the emotion in the mind is still more of an existence than the speech that's going to come as a result of the emotion. The existence of the emotion is already in a state of ispashtos. It's there. And that's why we learned earlier regarding the emotions, the itmatach, the itmeches b'ma'adeima, that it's already expanding in the womb of the mother, of Bina. But it's not fully developed. His head is folded. The vav that's in the hay, when you're looking at a hay, you see the vav, the bottom leg. That's included in the hay. It's a line. The vav is there. It's a line. But the beginning of the brewing of Malchus, of the germinating of Malchus, Hanikra Diburei Elyon, that's called supernal speech. Bebina in Bina, Einoi Basham b'pchinas Gilui Gomer, is not in like her brother or like her husband, the Zeir Anpin, in a revealed way. Kamoy Amidos Tezal, like the Midos of the Zeir Anpin. Elirak b'pchinas Helen, only in a very subtle, concealed way. The Hiskalalus Pezal, in a very hidden state, very integrated in the Zeir Anpin. It's in the vav that's in the hay. V'gam zois b'pchinas nekuda bilvad. Number one, it's part of the vav, and even when it's part of the vav, it's only a point. That's why in the bottom of the vav there is the bigger just a dot. V'hu b'chinas nekuda, and that's what we mean the nekuda shalapsia labar of stepping out. Asher oishid vav zeh asher b'toicha hey. This vav that's in the hay is sticking its foot out means it's already beginning to produce speech that's going to allow the emotions to go completely outside. It's not in a full line. It's only a makar, a source, and a root to the bringing into existence of the ikr metzias hamalchus, of the main existence of malchus. And not that malchus is really already pronounced and is there as an existence. And therefore, this shayrish is only a nekuda, a point. Since it is at least a shorish and a source for the coming into being of the revelation of speech, which is going to happen later. At least it's considered as if the foot is already sticking out. Because even just the power of speech, even if you don't have words yet, the power that you could speak is already considered a power that's outside of the midos. Emotions are still for yourself. Speech is the whole idea of speech is communication. So even if you're not talking yet, but the power to talk is communication to outside. It's all about exiting yourself to the outside. That's why this level of Malchus, where Malchus, even when she's still in her pre-potential state, is considered already the potential of exiting out. To understand all of this, and she's going to explain that this is all obviously deep mystical concepts in the emergence of the Zeir Anpin and eventually Malchus and the like. He says you're going to give an example from our experience within ourselves. So he's going to look at the subtlety of where words start in the human psyche, in the human experience. Where do you start hearing Malchus' speech, his words? Where do you start sensing the letters? Yes, you do it as don shadibur ba'adam mischalik. So there is, first of all, he's going to start from the outside in. He's going to trace speech from its most pronounced state, and then he's going to work the speech back to see where we can find it already starting. So yes, you do it as don shadibur ba'adam, speech in a person mischalik l'kamed avav tzurufim. Gets speech becomes separated into many tens of thousands of different combinations. And what I've been doing right now the last hour and a half, whatever. So many different words, so many different sentences, words, combinations of letters. They form letters and they go out. It's recorded, it's on YouTube, it's going to be there for I don't know how long. So it becomes an entity. This talk, this sentence, that sentence. A person talks. And there's so many different combinations. Here, every word is pronounced separately and individual and, right? B'tzirufim shoynim, different combinations. B'chalufim et tmurais har b'le'enshin, and you can exchange letters and so on and so forth. Which means things are becoming different subjects, different variations. Kach l'mayla, and the same is also above. In exhibit var Hashem shemayim nasu. The word of God is the cosmos. And all the myriad different creations that there are in the cosmos, in the world. So much. Planets and the various different creatures and insects and fish and birds and trees. And it's all from the different combinations that there are. Minerals. And all the worlds. This is all the physical world. Then there's worlds upon worlds. Because they're coming into being of all the worlds. Neshava only came into existence only from the supernal speech. And since it comes in many different combinations, and exchanges, and substitutions, talking about the speech itself is that you have God says one thing, and then the words exchange into different different exchanges and substitutions and letters, which we know, gematrias and so on and so forth, which form lower forms of speech, which condense the energy and the force of the divine speech, as explained in this beginning of the second part of Tanya. And that kind of minimizes the energy and the power to create lesser forms of creations. But these exchanges go on, ein shir, without an end. Al kain, and therefore, ein shir l'savas ha'olamos. There's literally no limit to the coming into worlds, midvar Hashem, from the word of God. Moshiach also, like it says, v'alamas ein mispar, there's no end to the worlds. Al tikra al almos, simply it says, alamis ein mispar, which means maidens, there's no end. Ella oilamos, worlds. The pasuk is referring to that there's Shisham Hema Malchus, there's 60 queens, and there's no end to the girls. The spiritual meaning of that is there's no end to the various different letters that are going out. And the sages say it means the worlds are no end. So, infinite amount of worlds. Now, that's one speech, exits the person, and each word and each letter becomes pronounced as an entity and as a force unto itself. When it goes out and you reveal the speech, it's coming through a person's mouth. It comes out through your vocal cords and through your. So then it comes out very, very distinguished. As you can very strongly hear the letters. The letters are very pronounced. Because really, it's physical in a sense that it is combined from fire and water and ruach and wind, gashmiyim, physical. So it has a existence. But these letters, think about it, before the words come out to be pronounced words, so much so that you could even record it on a physical device, this very words, these sentences, before you spoke them, were in the pre-mind of the person that was communicating it. And over there, it's totally hidden. The person himself might even, at this point, not even know that they have the potential of these sentences. They didn't think of it yet, or even if they thought about it. But before they gave the speech, it's existing. And these very letters are there, these words are there in the person, but in a very non-existent existence. The root of these letters that have been pronounced and exited and become in existence, they first exist in a more spiritual state. In the speaking soul, in the soul of the speaker. Because these letters, that are coming out in the 5 powers of speech, they're really spiritual letters. In other words, inside the person, it's not a K and a D and or a Gimel and a Zayin they are that, but not in the way we know them. They're spiritual powers. And they're rooted and set in the soul itself. These powers of letters, they're there already. They don't begin in the mouth. They don't begin over here. They begin as the Alter Rebbe proves this in Tanya, that it's not like the whole world of speech starts just by your mouth. It starts much deeper. These letters exist already as a spiritual letter, and just when it reaches this part, when it goes through the lungs and through the windpipe, and when it gets over here, these letters combine with physical air and moisture and all the other stuff that it picks up the physicalities, and it gets imprinted in physical substance, and then it takes on a physical form, the letter. All that's happening right over here as it's emerging outward, is that spiritual letters are dressing themselves in physical containers, so to speak. Or the letters themselves, not so much dressing itself, but the letters themselves physicalize, so to speak. And then they move out and then they become so pronounced. First, they exist as a spiritual force within the person. Like we see that we have before we speak, we have thoughts. And the thoughts are the same letters, A, B, C, D, but in a far more abstractish state. As it is known, as it is known that the soul is called a speaking soul. Even before you ever talk, and even before the soul is put into a body, it's already a speaking soul. That means it has the power of the letters. And obviously, it's not, when we say that a soul, a spirit has these letters, it's not that it has a million, 50 million actual physical letters inside of it. Like, how many A's can you put out? How many? Then you run out of A's, you run out of B's. I can't talk anymore. There's no more speech because it doesn't exist in a limited form, in a quantifiable form. But it's still, the power of these letters are there in the soul. Before it comes into a body, where it's not shaykh at all to pronounce physical letters, because for that you need fire, wind, water. In the physical sense, you don't have that. And he gives an example that we find that there was that souls speak to each other. And there was even certain people that were able to hear the souls speak. Obviously, they didn't hear the physical sounds like you hear. These were people that were able to tune into a higher state of existence and hear communication of spiritual letters communicated. It's almost like tuning into someone's thoughts. Like the sages relate the story of a chassid. This is a very righteous person, a very sensitive, subtle soul, that he went at night on Rosh Hashanah and he would sleep out in the cemetery and he would want to hear what the souls are talking. He heard two spirits talking. It doesn't mean that he couldn't pull out imagine, this guy, can set up a recording device and then he can come back the next day in shul. And instead of him having everybody thinking that he's a little, cuckoo, that he comes back and he says what he heard in the cemetery, he could record it. He says, here we are, the ghosts are talking. Because it's not that kind of speech that you can pick up with a device, because it's a subtle speech. Definitely these spiritual letters that are in the soul do not come into such a hergish, in a form that you can feel it, like the physical letters that are spoken through the mouth. But we see shahatinik. Okay, so once we've established that there is spiritual letters in the soul before the physical. Now he's going to trace it. Okay, once we have these, and then we see that that's like thought. But it's interesting. He's not even talking about thought yet. He's talking about just the letters of speech and the potential of speech before it becomes actual speech. Fine. Now he wants to trace it even into a much deeper part of the soul, where the letters emerge from. So he's going to deduce that from when a person's speech. We're going to figure that out from when a person can actually start talking. So we see that even though a soul is full of letters, yet you can't start talking from day one when the soul is in the body. Why? Because the soul has to acclimate in the body. The soul has to first, even though a soul is a mature soul, but as it's acclimating in the body as a baby, it has to kind of forge its powers into the body. And by doing that, it has to develop first its chachma and its bina. And that's what it starts doing. Its brain activity as a little baby starts figuring out. And there is an assimilation of the kochas of chachma and bina. That's when our consciousness develops. And you see that speech does not start till the child is about, 1.5, 2 years old. My daughter keeps on now sending me videos of my granddaughter. She's such a smart little girl, but yet she couldn't speak till now. And now it's like really cute that she's beginning to say all the things that you knew she knew before, but now she's beginning to say it. The letters, you can see that she had the power of thinking before and knowing all these things, but the letters haven't been accessible to her to be able to actually articulate them and say them. Now they're coming out. Why? Because the emergence of the letters have to come from the chachma and the bina. Chachma is the cognition of the mind, the two powers of the mind. And when that's developed, then the letters start to become more. So you see the letters are there. Now, he's going to explain the letters, when they are in Chachma and Bina, are more subtle even than the letters that we spoke before, the spiritual letters of the soul, before you speak them. There, they're not physical, but they're still letters. When they're still in Chachma and in Bina, they're so one with the intelligence in that initial core state that you can hardly notice the letters. And they're not so much letters. They're all like the power of speech. We see a child, before he's a year old or more than that, cannot say anything. Even though his nefesh, his soul, is full of letters. Because even the root of the revelation of the letter, Sheba Nefesh, in the soul, is not drawn. After there's a certain development of the Chachma and the Bina of the soul, Sheba Nefesh of the soul, Bishleimusan, in its Shleimus, which takes to about a year or two for the mind to kind of be the power of Chachma and Bina of the soul to like kind of get a hold in the body, of this infant. When they are not shining yet bishleimus in a complete way, lo yumshach gili oisius benefesh. The oisios of the nefesh are not drawn at this point. They're in a very hidden state in the Chachma and in the Bina. Sheba Nefesh. That's what you can see. The child knows, you can see in their eyes they know, but they can't talk because the letters are still too much, they haven't emerged out yet. They still one with the understanding. That's why the child doesn't talk. Once the Chachma and the Bina are completed, then leheir bishleimus, to be already in a certain maturity. Obviously, it's not shleimus of an adult, but it's a shleimus enough of they're aware, they know what's going on. The imkan, and afterwards, and they move him as alkopanim. We see from here the root of the coming of the emergence of the letters kalul be'elim b'chachma bina is there in a concealed state in Chachma and Bina. So Bina has already letters. And that's what he's explaining over here, that Malchus, which is speech, first exists in a concealed state in the Bina. Va'ikr b'pchinas Bina. It already starts in Chachma, but over there it's completely benign and unnoticed, the letters. It's the first epiphany of an idea, you don't even see that there's any letters there. In Bina is where the letters are becoming developed, even though we say Abba Yasid Brata, that Chachma is really the source of it. But Chachma is only the source of sources. Bina is where it starts to manufacture in a way of letters. The Ikr b'pchinas Bina, Areinu. Like we see, when you understand something, when you grasp something, that's when you have already a sense of words. Then there has to be already levush lahalbish haseichel. Then there has to be a garment to enclose the seichel. And the garment, the words is a garment. The words is not the idea. It's to facilitate the idea, to hold the idea, to express the idea. Like a person expresses themselves through their garment. You dress yourself in something to go out. So the idea, in order to present itself, needs garment. The garment is the speech, the letters. But at this point, it's not even called letters yet. It's just called a garment for the soul, because the letters are not yet so differentiated. It's not yet so wordy. It's very, and he refers to it, it's even pre-thought. Because when we say thought over here, there's different levels of thought. Our thought, where you're literally speaking words. You're just speaking in your mind. Now, those letters, of course, are still higher than letters of speech. But they're already divisible letters, and what you're going to say in 2 hours takes you to think an hour. It's faster because you think faster than you talk, but you still takes it a full hour. But then there is earlier than that, when you're just like the concept is registering, and there is already words. You can even hear yourself somehow, like there is already a garment, but it's very much embedded in the idea. And over there, like 3 minutes of thinking is 2 hours is 1 hour of thought and 2 hours of speech. So you see, the letters are still not so divided, not so elaborate, because it's not about the letters, it's about the concept and the understanding. But there is a garment. He calls it machshavas haseichel. It's machshava, but machshava as it is still part of seichel, part of intellect. Kasher ma'ayin b'seichel, when you're deeply, in other words, you're not conscious of the words. You're not conscious of how you're going to say it. Kasher ma'ayin b'seichel, when the person who's deeply thinking deeply in a concept, tarud b'machshava dafke, is very deeply occupied in the thought, very much invested in the thought, that you're not even conscious that you're thinking. Now this garment is the root for what later is going to come about as letters of what he calls machshava mamish, not machshava saseichel, not machshava while it's still in the Bina and seichel, but real machshava. Machshava as it's becoming like pronounced thought. This state of thought, of letters, when the letters are still machshavas haseichel, there's still the thought in the seichel, that's called the malchus when it's still in the Bina. We're talking about already the pregnant, the children, the ze'erampin is the excitement while it's still in, when it's in Bina, the excitement of the emotions while they're in Bina. The speech when it's in Bina means the machshavas haseichel. It's the intellect, the words that are there, but that are so subtle that you're not really, it's not yet the visible words, but there are words there. But since it's the source of the spoken letters, it's called psia lavar, it's called stepping out. Shenikra b'chenes acharayim de'ema, that's called the back of the mother. Malchus of it's the back, all the way, the tail end of Bina. Ki yedua, as it is known, be'inyan kesher shel tefillin, as it is known regarding the knot of the tefillin that is put behind over here, right? B'dalid rabasi, and we know that knot of the tefillin is in the shape of a dalid, in the back. B'dalid rabasi de echad, which is hinted to also in the large dalid of the word echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusa L'Olam Va, the next statement is already Malchus. Dalid of the Dalid Rabasi, that's the Malchus of Bina. Dalid is usually an indication of Malchus. Shehu B'chinas Leia Shemekabelas Mitvuna. Even not exactly that. I think the Kesher Shel Tefillin, the knot of the tefillin, and the Dalid Rabasi, that's not the Malchus of Tvina. The Malchus of Tvuna is actually inside your head, is the backside of your brain. The tefillin, the Dalid of the Echad, and the Kesher, the knot of the tefillin, that's indicative of the letters of thought. That's why it's called Leah. Like, let me make an introduction over here. Letters of speech, literal malchus, real speech, that's called Rachel. Leah is a primordial level of malchus. It's malchus in a more inner state, which is the letters of thought, not the letters of speech. That's why Leah is the older sister, because thought is older than speech. And speech is a product of it. It's called the younger sister, smaller one, and thought is much richer than speech. Why Leah is called the older sister, and Rachel is called the younger sister. Tana. But both Leah and Rachel, the letters of thought are makabel, they're receiving from a much deeper level of thought. From the thought while it's still in the seichel, that's higher than Leah. That's called Malchus of Tvuna. That's where Leah is receiving from. That's where the expansive thought is receiving from that level of thought. Okay. But this is what we're saying is the pregnancy of Malchus in Bina. Malchus de Tfuna Hanal, in this stage of Malchus of Tfuna, Sham over there, as we were saying earlier, you don't sense yet letters, Gemurim Adayin. You don't really sense fully fledged letters. Gamba Machshava, even in thought. It's what I was saying earlier. There's a difference between when you're like rethinking something that you understood already, and you're like going through it, especially if you're preparing a speech of saying, then you're really talking to yourself. But even if you're just thinking, but you're not deeply immersed in perceiving a concept, you're just thinking, that's where you're really like talking to yourself. But that's regular thought. Then there's the thought of seichel, which over there you're not even sensing yet words. You're sensing just almost like you're just experiencing. But there are words, but everything is, the words are not so divisible. That over there it's only the root and the source of the coming into being of the letters. It's not really letters yet, and it's also just a nekuda. It's still very concealed. You don't really feel the letters, you feel more the seichel, the concept. Like we see in the literal kasher, when a person thinks some kind of thought, an idea in a machshava, the whole concept you get in one scan, in one integration. You don't really have all the details and all the individual thoughts. Everything that you can be marchev in this seichel, which will take you in thought and in speech like an hour or two. It's all in one scan. Hanikra malchus de tvuna. That's called this malchus of tvuna. Hanikra machshavas haseichel, which is called the thought of the seichel. V'lo stam machshava. It's not the regular level of machshava shenikra leah. Leah is called real thought. Rachel is speech. Leah is thought. It's the source from where that comes from. A more pre-thinking state. Canal. Beskira berega achad. It's all there in 1 second. The masha nitzach achakach lefarish bedibor. This that you're going to have to later go out and explain in dibor. The gamba machshavta, and also in thought. Laharach kama shois, that it will take you many hours. That's when it starts to take on the various different combinations of letters that come in thought, and then later and in letters of speech. When you sense already the wording, it becomes already very pronounced. But all this was all embedded in the skanim and echlolem, not b'pkenes nakuda achas. It was all with one nakuda, b'pkenes malchus tetvuna, in malchus tetvuna on this kolel that we said earlier. Afterwards it goes out from its concealed, and its integration, to an expansiveness, when it goes into thought, and eventually, of course, into speech. And all of this will be understood. I feel this very strongly all the time. When I'm giving a class, especially when I'm giving a lecture, not a class like this. I'm giving a class like this, I'm teaching from inside. When I'm giving a lecture, like in the Monday classes, if I prepare the way I should, I don't always do it, but if I prepare the way I should, I'll learn something. And obviously I'm learning. While I'm learning, I'm taking it. But then I'll sit down, I'll think for a few moments, and I'll like process just a point. Like, oh, what's my main thing that I got out of it? Like how's this idea now registering in me? How is it like exciting me? What do I want to give over in this class from what I took in the book? And then what I'll do is, and that's like the epiphany, that's like the concept, that's the idea. And what I'll do is I'll take a walk. And I'll walk sometimes for an hour, sometimes a half an hour, an hour. I used to do much more. Walk for 2-3 hours. And what's happening is I'm fleshing out the whole this one exciting idea is now taking on, not yet in speech, but in thought, like a whole, and suddenly all the details that were hidden in it are now emerging as entire paragraphs and entire subjects and different nuances and it's creating this whole tapestry, so to speak. And then afterwards, you go and you give the class, and while you're speaking, then it's becoming even more pronounced. So what you thought is going to be a short class ends up being a pretty much longer class, because then once you're getting into speech, it's becoming more and more elaborate, the words and the differentiating elements of it. But anybody that deals with communication can be sensitive with this process. And all of this will be understood to the one who understands above. In this stepping out of Malchus outward. This is all Romes. It's indicating on the source of the coming into existence of the Nukva, of the feminine part of the Ze'er Anpin, the female of the Ze'er Anpin. The world of speech, that's called the supernal speech, the world of divine speech, which will later emerge as the 10 utterances. Shabaim, that will eventually come forth, with many combinations. This is obviously very important because this is the substance of all of existence. This is what all of creation, all of history, and all of reality is made out of. It's this speech that God has given. It's God's story that He tells. And they come out already as different moments of time and space and everything different. The occurrences of yesterday, of last year, and of a decade ago, and then different to what's happening now and what will happen tomorrow, because this is all different parts of the divine speech, how each one is manifesting in its own space and time. And there it's becoming reality, it's becoming very real, very sensible. From the divine fire, wind, and water, which is God's kindness, severity, and compassion, and ikra koila dibur, which is all a combination in the power of speech, the voice of speech. Just like the physical expression of speech. But even in the divine too, we can trace these letters. Its root, before it becomes the spoken word that the Shekhinah Malchus has spoken out in creating the universe, before that, these words exist in Malchus of Atzilus. They first exist within the Shekhinah, inward, not yet spoken out. It's like a person preparing a speech before they speak. There, the words are far more spiritual in them. Shenikra nefesh hamadaberes. Malchus is called the soul that speaks. Ketargum, like the Targum says, lenefesh chaya leruach mamalala, to a speaking spirit. The Yedua, it is known the shaydish oisius shebe Malchus tatzilus. The root of the letters of Malchus tatzilus are nimshach. But even though the letters in Malchus Ta'atzilus are far more spiritual than when they get pronounced and actually become the building blocks of creation, the building energies of creation. But they exist on a much higher level when you go higher in Atzilus, to the source of the speech and of the letters of Chachma and Bina and Atzilus. The Iker and the main manufacturing of these letters, Mibchenas Malchus T'Tvuna, in the Malchus element of Tevuna, of Bina. That's when the concept, the epiphany of Chachma, that has now been fleshed out in Bina, is now being thought in letters, but very, very subtle letters that you don't even know that you have. It's a lavush of seichel, it's a garment, but a garment that's one almost with the seichel. Which is called the thought of the intelligence, which from there is the source of the coming into being of the letters of thought. That's called, and again, the thought mamish is called Leah. And the root of the letters of speech, that is called Rachel. And this is the idea of Bina, of Atzilus. She is the one that gives birth. Because from Bina comes the emergence of letters of Malchus. Like it says by the birth of the Shvatim, after she gives birth to the boy, she gives birth to a girl as well. So I know we're interchanging over here. Malchus is Rachel, and that's what's being born. And now we're saying it's Dina. So it manifests in a lot of biblical stories. So Dina is Malchus, and Rachel is Malchus, and Leah is a pneumiistic level of Malchus, Machshava versus Dibur. But this is the stepping out. Shebevav shebetoich. The vav that's in the hay has a little indication, indicator, its bottom leg, which is already not just the male, but also the attached female. Shebetoich hay rishayna de Bina, which is in the first hay of Bina kaniskalia. Ki avav, because the vav hu b'china ze'er ampin is the be'er ampin shenikra bein le'ima. It's called the son to the mother. V'apsiya labar, and it steps out. The oishit chutz la'atzmusay, that it's sticking out. Sharshay gamke mebchinas Bina is also rooted in Bina. Shenikras eima banim is called the mother of the children. It's not yet speech. It's at least coming about a shoresh and a mucker to the speech. It's still very much integrated, vehelem, and concealed the malchus the tvuna in the stage of malchus of tvuna. It's almost like there's nothing else but Bina, but yet in a subtle state you can already see the beginning of letters. That's called stepping out. Because the ze'er anpin that's included in Ema, in Bina, is called the midos of the seichel, and this is called the machshava of the seichel, kidu as it is known. And the stepping outside of himself, is the thinking of the seichel, the words, the thoughts of it, keniskalel. And both of them, and both of them come into existence in Bina of Atzilus. The Klulim Barn included in her Behelim Gadol in a very concealed state. And afterwards, they come out to a revealed state, Betolda at birth, and then when they emerge completely outward, you have the male, the Zuchra, the male, the Zeir Ampin of Atzilus, and the Nukva and the Malchus of Atzilus, as they are a full and complete entity on their own. Shen Oisi is Vavke, that's the letter is Vavke. After the Vavke is no more embedded in the previous Hay, but the Vav stands on its own and the Hay stands on its own. The Shem Avaya ki Yadu Avadai Lamevin, it is enough to those who understand. Okay, all of this is all a preparation to the next part of the Zohar, where he starts to explain the two pregnancies. Bina is pregnant with the Ze'er Anpin and Malchus. And then further down the chain, Malchus becomes pregnant from her husband, from the Midos, the emotions transmit their energy into Malchus. Malchus becomes pregnant with the soul of Moshiach. And what does that do? That brings godliness into full manifestation into the lower three worlds, which is going to be when Mashiach comes. And that's where he's going to go now into. So all what we learned till now was just a preliminary introduction to this next stage. And this is the meaning of from Gevois, from the valley. I behold it. Pirish Gevois. What is Gevois? Ubchenas Bina. That's Bina. As we spoke last week. Mountains is Chachma, male, and valleys is female. So, and when we say Gevois, we mean Bina or Tavuna, two levels in Bina. Shemaylidim, that they give birth, Lizun, that's the mother that gives birth to the male and female, Begilui Pchenazah, in the revelation of the Zeir Anpin. Hu bevav shebetoich hay, that's in the vav, that's inside the hay of Bina. Upchenes nukva dezah, and the nukva of the Zeir Anpin, bepchenes psia de levar, in the stepping outward. Shenikra malchus de tvuna, that's called the malchus of tvuna. Ashurenu ka'al zun. And when we say Ashurenu, it's stepping out. Who is stepping out? The babies. Who is that? The children, which are both the male and the female. But in this case, they're both one still, because the vav includes the hay in it as well. Ashurenu ka'al zun, on the male and female. Ki hanukva klula b'zeir anpin. The nukva is still included in the zeir anpin. Ki yidua be'inyan zacha v'shama b'dibur echad nemru v'day l'mev. Okay. Now, he moves on to the second passage of the Zohar, which is Now, when we're saying that give us, which is the pregnant mother, do we read it give us in the singular, or do we read it give ois in the plural? In the higher Mesifta, it says read it give us in the singular. In the lower Mesifta, in the Mesifta Derekia, it says give ois. Why? Because there's two mothers, which is the mother, Bina mothering the Ze'er Anpin and Malchus, and then Malchus mothering the soul of Mashiach. And then he's going to explain how for the soul of Mashiach to be born, you need not just Malchus to give birth, but Bina has to assist in that birthing. That's the Nakuda that we're going to learn now. Mesifta Ilah. And now in the higher Mesifta, give us Chaser Vav. It says, give us, now he's quoting back the passage of the Zohar, which I read earlier. Why would we read it without a Vav? Because Ramah de Kula, Ahi Allah de Kula. Because this is still above it all and higher than all. We'll soon see what that means. Mesifta Derekia, however, in the academy of the firmament, which is a lower level, over there it says that you're supposed to read it migva ois, ba'ois vav, with the vav inside of it. Why? Which is plural. Because va'ashlan the train sitrin, because it completes on two sides. Chad, number one, do I give us lo yisparish min b'rola almin. The mother never goes away from her son. Bina never departs from the Ze'er Anpin. L'shafkis she doesn't leave go of him. The Chad, and the second read v'chulu. And as I told you, he doesn't give much explanation on that line. And the second reason is the Hagiva de Latata, because there is another Giva, there is another Giva Ois, there is another valley, which is Brad, the lower, she's also pregnant, Brad Eskalal Ba, the child that's included in her, it's Tarech Lazimne Da'asi, will need in the future help from her mother, Kadyese Malka Mashiach, when Moshiach is about to come. Lenat Lalei, so he needs to be lifted up. Give us ilah to the higher giva. Malchus, who's the mother, has to pass the baby up, so to speak, to Bina. Ula alalei goy gadfa, to lift him up under her wings. Begin let kafalei, to strengthen him. Ula oikmalei, and to fortify him. B'chayin ilan, with supernal life. What does this mean? So first he's going to explain the difference between the higher giva and the lower giva. So he explains like this. I'm sorry. First he's going to explain if you read it givas in the singular or giva ois. Givas chaser vav, to read it without a vav. What's the vav? The vav is the vav of the Ze'er Anpin. That's the vav is. The hay is the mother. If you read, and which is also called Giva, which is a valley. With a Vav, the Vav is her child. So without the Vav is a motherless mother, or a woman without the baby. That's Bina as she stands on her own. The Alken Givas Chaser Vav. And that's why the Givas is without a Vav. Now, I would have thought the reason that's without a Vav is because she's not pregnant yet. She's without the Vav is her son. But he doesn't emphasize that much. Even though it seems so from the Zohar, he doesn't emphasize. Oy vey, what's going on? The nose is so ticklish. Sorry. Gotta figure this out. Because give us chasavav shamayr aloshin yechidus. The main thing is that it is indicating yechidus. Yechidus means alone, one. Masha enkin giva ois loshin rabim. Giva ois loshin rabim. Shu mipnei b'chinas malchus tetvun. When you say giva ois, as I spoke earlier, it means valleys. So it's malchus tetvuna. Why is it valleys? Because incorporated in the mother, Giva'is, is also the lower, is Malchus. like we learned earlier, that Malchus is included in the mother. And in this case, we're seeing both these Hays, Ashurenu, carrying babies, both these Hays having a fetus inside of them. Shehu mipnei b'chinas Malchus tetvuna, because in the Gevois Ashurenu, it's also including two mothers, the Malchus, the mother and the daughter, shenichlo ba, which is included in the mother. Initially, the Malchus, obviously, then she's not having a baby, but since you can sweep them both together in Gevois, because really Malchus really initiates in Bina, and eventually Malchus is too going to have her child. Because Bina is the source of the nukva of the Ze'er Anpin. Again, the nukva of the Ze'er Anpin is Malchus. Canal. Like mother, like daughter. And in that stage, you have to notice, you have to say Gavais too. So are we looking just at Bina as she stands on her own? Or as Bina is already a source for the Ze'er Anpin, which includes also the Malchus. And then there is Gavais that are having children. The Zau Sha'amar, and this is what it says. Now first he's going to explain the Gavais without the Vav. Give us. The Zau Sha'amar Amo de Kula Hi Elo de Kula. The Zohar says what is higher than everything, what is above everything. Dahainu. When Bina is still receiving the lights of Chachma, she's not yet becoming a source for children yet. She's just a wife, not so much a mother. So when she's receiving the hashpa adayim mepchinas oir abba from the light of father of Chachma, v'nikra yichud ava, and that's called the yichud, the intimacy, the unity between Chachma and Bina, ba'atzmusai, for themselves. There's no children yet during their honeymoon period of Chachma and Bina. Before there is children, from their yichud. It's during the time when there's no ibur yet, there's no pregnancy yet, b'mei ima in the womb of the mother. Hanal, b'tziur vav shebetoich that which we explained earlier would be the vav in the hay. So in this case, it's almost like Bina is still a dalid. It's not yet carrying. It's not a hay yet. It doesn't have yet a baby in her womb. Give us. So there's no vav there. So the vav isn't there. So it's give us without the vav. Lashon yachid. Two things. And then obviously, two things. It's only one valley. There's no malchus there yet, for sure not. And also there's no vav, which is no child, no zeir anpin. When Bina is standing on her own, receiving from the light of Abba, and that's why it's called, he's explaining why it's called Ramah de Koila, why she's so high. Ramah, it says two things. Ramah de Kula, the Zohar says, higher than everybody, Ilah, above everybody. So he's medayik the Zohar is not just being redundant. Ramah is because she is receiving from the one that's Ram, that's Chachma. Chachma is called Ram, higher than everybody. Ilah al-Kula is Bina itself. Bina is Ilah, is high. She's not yet mothering, she is high, and she's receiving from what is exalted, which is Chachma, which is completely high. So it's Chachma and Bina as they're on their own. So, when she's receiving from the light of Abba, Tzurim. That's called Merosh Tzurim, from the tops of mountains. The peaks of mountains, the highest mountains. Mikula. And this is what it says, above all. And the next thing, when it says Ahi Ilah, it says already in feminine terms, Ahi Ilah, she is higher, is referring to Bina when she's very high. When Bina is attached to Chachma, cleaving to her husband. So that's because he's going to say that the word mi, which we know is mi, is Gematria 50, which is an indicator of Bina, exists on two levels. One is that she's the me receiving from Chachma, or me as the source of her children. So there's two psukim. Mi bara Eila is referring to, like I said, look up and see. Mi bara Eila, who created these? These is referring to the midos. That mi Bina is the source of Eila. Eila means these. Eila is gematria 36. It's the 6 midos because 6 times 6 is 36. Mi bara Eila. Mi is Bina. Bara creates. Eila these. That's the lower part of Bina. Then there is another level of Bina. When Bina is called Mitzrayim, Meitzar Mi. What does that mean? Meitzar means she's absorbing me. From higher. From who? Chachma is called Yam. Yama Chachma is the ocean of Chachma. When Bina receives a drop from Chachma and she absorbs it, she's taking the Yam, flipping it over from Yam, and it becomes a tziruf of me. So it's when it's going from the man to the woman, it's getting turned over upside down. So from Yam of Chachma becomes the me of Bina. But at this point, Bina is still completely unknowable, attached to Chachma. And then later, Bina lowers herself down much lower. Let's see, sort of the difference of what we said earlier called Bina to Tavuna. And then it's mi bara Eila. That's the lower me. So give us is when me is still attached to Chachma. As he says, the conversion of the letters of Yam of Chachma, shenikra meitzar mi, lekabel mi Yam Chachma, she's receiving from Yam Chachma. Ma'ashe enken kishenei lodem bahamidos, when the midos are already born, nikra mi bara Eila, she's already connected to Eila. V'oisius mi Eila shenemar, which was in the word Elokim. Elokim is Aleph Lamed Hey is Eila. And the last two letters are Yam, which can also be flipped over to the words mi. Mi and Eila is when you separate the mi and the Eila. Sheniflik v'nechlik mi, lahoyled amidos. It's the idea of Peleg Elokim, I'm not going to get into that. It's the bringing about that the midos are born. Shenikra Eila, shu gematria lamed vav, which is gematria lamed vav. Oisius Leah, and Leah is the mother of the children. Leah is also 36. Sheyolda shisha banim, she gave birth to 6 children. And the 6, each one incorporates all other 6. Okay. So this is the level that's called givas. Higher. Now, he's in a parenthesis over here. He's going to give another pirush to explain what does it mean. Ramah dekula, ilah dekula. Problem is that we're going to spend, if we learn it, a half an hour just on this nakuda. And it's in parentheses. And I would like to speak a little bit more about the birthing of Moshiach already. So I'm going to skip this and you can learn it on your own. He's giving another pirush that it's not referring to Chachma and Bina, but rather it's referring to the 50th gate of Bina, which is included in Chachma. It's a little technical, seemed to be an Inyan, but I think the Maimah could be learned without it. Okay? That's why it's in parentheses. So we'll leave it for now. It's a whole paragraph that I'm skipping. Ube Mesifta de Rekia. When we're turning over to page 430. Ube Mesifta de Rekia. But in the Mesifta, in the academy of the firmament, which is lower, over there we already look at Migvais and we pronounce it with a vav, the way it is actually written in our Sefer Torah. Migvais ba'is vav. Piddish, what does that mean? Ube Mesifta de Rekia in the firmament of Rakia. Chol Kemal Piddish, and by the way, this idea of Mesifta de Rakia is discussed this week's in Parshas Metzora. In Lakutei Torah, he talks about an argument that went on between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Mesifta de Rakia. So there he explains what does Mesifta de Rakia mean. But in any case, Chol Kemal Piddish de Mesifta Ilah. They argue on the higher academy called Mesifta Ilah. And they say they give us Chaser Vav, which the higher academy insisted that the give us is without a Vav. Ela adarabah, tzarech liyasmolei vav davka. You have to have a vav there. Mishum the ashlan l'trein sitri, because it's completing at both sides. Ki hine explains what does this mean. Klolis inyan hakavana, because the general kavana bepirish migvais Areinu. Because what are you telling me? You're talking over here, Bina, as she's in a high level, she's single. It's only Bina. There's no malchus there. Very good. But then what's the whole point of Areinu? We're talking about how What does he say? I'm seeing the Jewish people. I'm seeing the existence of Israel, of Yisrael, as it exists in Chachma and Bina, their roots, their source. So we're talking about already of a birth. So then, why would you be talking? The whole idea of Asherenu is how I see him in his parents already. But I see him. So we're talking about already something that is being born. Now, you could give a pirush, even if you're saying it's referring to Bina, because you can say the existence of children in their parents before the child was even pregnant. The potential. In other words, as a parent, as a mother, and as a father, even in their honeymoon year, before there's any pregnancy, they have already their children included in them. There's the potential of the children. But in a very non-existent state, and that's what Bilam says, I see them already in Chachma and Bina. But obviously, that's not the same to say that once there was a pregnancy already, and there's already an existence to the children. And this is what this Pirush is saying. So when you're looking at it as already in existence, and once you're seeing already the existence of the son, of the boy, of the Zeir Anpin, included in the Zeir Anpin is already, as we spoke earlier, the nukva, and the potential for speech. And eventually, this little girl that's still in the mother is going to emerge out, marry her husband, become pregnant, and also give a birth. And all of that is hinted to in the words mugva ois asherena, the birthing of the further birth of eventually of the neshama of Moshiach from Malchus, with the assistance of Bina, as will be explained in this piece. Mugva ois ashereni kol b'chinas ibura midos bebina. It's talking about the midos as they are in a fetal state in Bina Kana. It is known what it says in Zohar. Al pasuk itim levana in kala. In the Zohar it says that that on the pasuk itim levana in kala, with me. I don't know exactly what the pasuk means. I forgot to look it up now. But on that pasuk it says, the trein nukvin parish Shlomo Malka. That when Shlomo Malka is talking about a kala, a bride, he is indicating two brides, two nukvin. Why? Because there's two levels of nekeva. There's the higher nekeva and the lower nekeva. Hey Yillah, hey Tata, the higher and the lower. Shenikra Eme Yillah, one is called the supernal mother. Ve'eme Tata, the other one is called the lower mother. And just like the Zeir Anpin, there is a state before it emerges outward in birth. It's first in a fetal state in the womb of the supernal mother in Bina, which is the vav that's in the first hay. There's another pregnancy in the womb of the lower mother, which is the lower hay, which she is called the nukva of the Zeir Anpin. Again, that's Malchus. In her, there's also a vav. She's also a dalit, and in her is the vav. What's her? The vav. The vav is her fetus. That's the ibor. That's the pregnancy. The nishmas malka Mashiach, of the neshama of Mashiach. Shukolul achshav b'pchinas ibor, which during the time of exile, Mashiach's neshama is in a state of ibor, in a fetal state. Behelem, in the concealment. Bebeten Malchus Tatzilus, in the womb of the Shekhinah of Malchus of Atzilus. B'yois achshav begalus, during the time of exile, Mashiach is being developed. Kamoshi Yizbar. And this is what he's indicating in this remez of this mimer of the Zohar. Shama Beis Devarim, he says two things. Chad, number one, the high give us lo yisparish mebrola alman. One is the higher pregnancy. The mother doesn't separate from the son. Shu b'china Zeir Anpin, that's the Zeir Anpin. B'yoyse b'ibor b'beten emelo. When he is in a state of a fetus in his mother, the nikra giva silah, which is called the higher giva. V'abeis, and the second one, the giva, the latata, the lower giva. Shu b'china malchus, which is malchus, and nikra ematata, which is called the lower mother, and it's k'nes kliel. Brodi iskalal ba, the child that's included in her. It's the asi will be needed in the future. Kadyese Malka Mashiach, when it comes time for the birthing to happen of Malka Mashiach, Shubchinas Ibur Nishmas Malka Mashiach, which is the impregnation of the soul of Malka Mashiach, the Iskalul B'Pchinas Malchus Achshav. That's now in a state of Iskalulus, of inclusion in Malchus now, Ula asid yizgalam in a helam, and then he's going to be revealed. Knows the Shechina is carrying the soul of Mashiach during the entire time of exile. And from her, Mashiach will emerge on that day. And all of this is here to give a reason why this device needs to be filled with avav. Double valleys. Chada is in order to complete both sides. It's for both types of pregnancies. One is the ibur, the pregnancy of the Zeir Anpin, inside the mother of Bina. And the second one, ibur Malka Mashiach, the ibur of Mashiach, be'ematata, in the lower. So, what's the shaykhs? Shama Mashiach and the Zeir Anpin. Zeir Anpin is a manifestation of the divine and the birth of Mashiach. The answer is, what's Mashiach? Mashiach is the expression of God in the physical world. It's a person who's so unified with the Eibishter that every element of him is not him, is divinity. It's just that the divinity is actually fully expressing itself all the way down in the ultimate human being, who's then going to enable all of us to be divine beings just like him. But obviously him on an infinitely higher level, because he's the general soul, and all of us in a small. But now we're all creations. Because our consciousness is creative consciousness, or creation consciousness. When Mashiach will come, through Mashiach opening up the flow of the divine to flow fully in, to extend fully into this world. That's the next stage of the birth of the Zeir Anpin. Manifesting in Atzilus, that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu's child, as we're going to see. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu impregnates. I know the soul sounds crazy, and we have to take away all the physical element of it, and realize that we're dealing with abstract, as with this is all in the most, what do you call it? I have a fancy word for it. Anthropomorphically speaking. Right? As if anybody knows what anthropomorphically means. But whatever, it's the idea that we have to undress it from all of its physical meanings and see it in its purely divine thing. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who he is and what he is, transmits of his entire being into Malchus, and that gives birth to Mashiach's neshama. The birth of Malka Mashiach in the lower mother. That's why it needs to be the word giva ois with a vav, indicating two valleys, and it's two pregnancies. Bina and Malchus, the higher giva, the giva tata, and the lower giva, and the lower. By both of them it says Asherenu, Keniskal El V'Dailamev. Okay. Biurei calls it. What's the idea of Mashiach's birth? So he explains like this. So first we need to understand who is Mashiach. Understand what's the idea of the ibur of the neshama of Mashiach ben Dav. Bebeten Malchus Tatzilus. In the beten, in the womb of Malchus of Atzilus. The ineksiv by Mashiach, because by Mashiach it says, V'hu mechoylol mipsha'enu. Moshiach is suffering from our sins. Meduka, he is crushed, me'avanesenu, from our inequities. Ubechaburasai, and through his infliction, through his wound, nir pelanu, we are being healed. In other words, he's suffering through the exile to bring healing ultimately to the world. And it's not understood. Klal. Like the Gemara says, that's why that when they asked what's the name of Mashiach, they said his name is the leper, because he's suffering, as we said in the beginning of the class. The Eich Yatachan, how can it be? Should be Yisuri Mashiach Yir Palanu. What's the connection? Mashiach suffering, and that causes healing to us. And why should he suffer? Because of our sins. Acha Omar, until it says, well, what says his fault? Medukam avaneseinu, that he is crushed through our sins. Ach inyan ki yadua, as it is known, the B'chinas Malchus, the Atzilus, Malchus of the Atzilus, which is the Shekhinah, who makar klolus nishmas Yisrael. She is the source of all souls. The Shekhinah is the mother of all souls. Lamaila, kamashakasav, like it says, Habitu, look well, El Tzurim choitzavtem, to the rock from where you've been excavated. Who's that rock? That's the Shekhinah. Now, when the Jewish people go to exile, Gam Sharsham umakar chatzava, so their source and their source of excavation goes along with them. So when we go in amongst the nations and the Jewish people suffer amongst the nations, are afflicted and persecuted and go through all kinds of dark difficulties, like we don't have to explain how much suffering Israel, the Jewish people, has. Our soul source is also going into exile, into the spiritual clipot, and suffers persecution. Which is called the Shekhinah. Mislabeshes, she becomes enclosed, just like we become enclosed in the nations. The Shekhinah becomes enclosed in the supernal sources of the nations, which are the 70 ministering angels above. Ba'ayin Sarim, in there. Beside Golos HaShekhinah. And that's the exile of the Shekhinah, which is indescribably painful. What is known, what the sages say, Galula Edom Shekhinah. When the Jewish people were exiled to Edom, the Shekhinah is with us. So we go to exile and suffer, the Shekhinah goes in and suffers. So far we have nothing about Mashiach yet. We just have the suffering of the mother soul of Israel, which is the Shekhinah, and all of her children. V'nikra, and she is called Sukkas David, the Sukkah of, she's not David, the Sukkah of David. The Sukkah of David is which means the protector, the hut of David, the Sukkah, which is the Shekhinah. Because we know that Malchus is also called, David HaMelech was the Merkava, he's the chariot to Malchus. So Malchus is the Sukkah of David. But it's called Hanoifeles, who falls, because the Shekhinah falls. This is what the sages indicate when they say, when is the fallen one going to come? Which is referring to Mashiach. So even though till now we didn't mention Mashiach yet, the Jewish people and our supernal mother, she's fallen one, we fall. But there's one missing link that he's not so expressive of, and that is her child, which is all of us, is first included in one child, and that's our central soul. So there's the mother, there is the one child that splinters into a gazillion children, and that's not gazillion, but all the souls of Israel. And that's Mashiach, is the nucleus of all souls. And that's Bar Nafli, that's where Mashiach, because as the mother falls, she falls, he explains later, she falls with her child, with Mashiach. So all the individual pain and suffering of the Jewish people, which every person, the individuals have suffered the pain of exile, if you take that all together into one soul, that's Mashiach suffering. And that's rather the same, equal, or less, but still like the suffering of the Shekhinah, which is the mother of this soul. He has fallen as his mom has fallen. Because when a woman is pregnant and she falls in and is trapped, her fetus inside of her is also trapped. And this is when it says, it's a real mystical secret, where God allows for the forces, the unholy man, the unholy forces of clipa, that they can rule and dominate over holiness and over the source of holiness on the level at least of Shekhinah. Now, Adam Ablial, the evil person, the clipa of clipa, the evil man of clipa, Sheshoilet, that dominates, has dominion al Adam the Kedusha, on the man of holiness, B'chinas Malchus the Kedusha. And it's a deep secret. It has to be that way. Ultimately, it's for the demise of the clipa. The clipa is doing itself, and it's doing itself it's killing itself by doing this. But that's what it is. It's for its own destruction. But temporarily, it thrives and grows and thinks it's so powerful. It's because one side gathers strength against the other side. And this idea that the Shekhinah, together with the Jewish souls, together with the Neshama of Mashiach, is all in exile in the clipa and suffering, is also expressed in the idea that the whole power, that the reason why the clipa wants this, is because all power comes from holiness. So when they can take the Shekhinah into exile, they can siphon her energy, they can abuse her and steal her powers. And that's why the sages say, that Tzur never became built up. Tzur is the capital of the clipa. Shu Malchus the clipa. It's the kingdom of clipa. Only when Jerusalem was destroyed. So from the treasures of Jerusalem, they took and stole those treasures and built up Tzur. Tzur is they generally translated as a place called Tyre, which is actually where the big earthquake happened in the summer, this past summer, in that area. Kind of, it was a destruction over there in Lebanon, but which is indicating already the rebuilding of holiness. Again, that's what I spoke about in the summer. But in general, it can be speaking about one particular place, but it represents the entire realm of the unholy. Yerushalayim is Malchus the Kedusha. So it's one. In order for the klipa to be powerful, it has to destroy or take that energy from. That's why we also say regarding the Shekhinah that her feet go down to a place of death. It's a pasuk in Mishlei, I think. It says her feet go down to a place of death, which means she enlivens the forces of death. That means that she goes into the hecholot, into the chambers of the chitzonim, of the external forces. Kamaimer, as it also says, the chivya katir leragli de nukva, that the snake katir probably means ties the feet of the female. Now he brings this from Tikkun Zohar, Tikkun Chavav, Daf Ayin Beis Amud Aleph on the bottom. I looked it up. I see it's talking about a snake and a woman, but the exact lashon that it's chivya katir leragli de nukva, I don't find over there. So maybe there's a different girsa or whatever, so I couldn't get exactly the exact definition of it. But it seems like it has some kind of a power over the feet of Malchus. It can take it into hostage. As it is known with the whole concept of what we try to do in rectification by midnight lamentations and tikkun chatzos. B'pirushim, which when we say those who do this tikkun would say, chapter 137, Pirush Aru Ada Yesodba, where it says over there when they destroyed the temple, they said, Aru, destroy it till the Yesod, which is some kind of an abuse that the forces of klipa are digging into the Shekhinah to destroy her and to take her energy. V'hine, now behold, okay, so that's what's happening in the Shekhinah and in the Jewish souls. Now, how does Mashiach fit into this? So he explains. The Shekhinah, during the time of exile, in addition to her going to exile, she's pregnant. The truth is, the reason she goes to exile seems to be, even though he doesn't explain it over here, as a result and a derivative of the pregnancy. After she's pregnant, she becomes pregnant, that's when she goes with her fetus in her pregnant state into exile. That's when the klipa get a hold of her, during the whole pregnancy. And they last, and they siphon energy and torment her and all of her children during the entire pregnancy stage, which is the entire exile. And then when it comes to birth, then the exile ends. This pregnancy is the soul of Moshiach. So he explains, now, but who's she pregnant from? Her pregnancy is to create the souls of Israel. So she's pregnant from Israel. We're called the children of Israel. Who's Israel itself? The Ze'er Anpin, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was called Yisrael. Yaakov, Yisrael. So Yisrael has relations with Rachel. And we see Taka Rachel becomes pregnant, she dies in her pregnancy. There's like, you see the drama in the birth of Rachel. Rachel is the Shekhinah. She's the one later who's going to cry for the Jewish people. Everything in Rachel. Rachel is the Shekhinah. The root of Mashiach, the root of all Jewish souls. And Moshiach, who is the ultimate soul of all souls. What's his root? Ba'atzilus u'b'chinas vav k'tzav is the Zeiramp. Mashiach's neshama is really rooted in the 6 emotions. Areinu, b'chinas Yisrael d'liyela. That's called the supernal Yisrael. Who shaydish kol nishmas Yisrael, who is the root of all Jewish souls. Asher noildu mi yichud zun. All neshamas come from a yichud, a certain yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shechina, that the Atzilus, k'mo shekasa b'ni b'chayri Yisrael. It says, God says about the Jewish people, you're my firstborn child. Spiritually, that means that there was an intimacy between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Shechina, which creates the Jewish souls. Neshamas Yisrael. That's all souls. Shaydish Nishmas Mashiach is the collective soul of all these souls. And just like a child, Hanoilad, that is born metipas ha'av, and just like a child who is born from the seminal drop of the father, which when a father creates a child, he's drawing that drop from his brain, which has within it the DNA of his entire being. Everything about him is in that drop. So too, all the elements of the Father, which in this case is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the manifestation of the 6 emotions. All the lights and vessels of a person and his 248 limbs is all embedded in that drop. Why? Because the power of reproduction is to create somebody in your image. Dafka. Like it says, you give birth to. So well understood, when the supernal tzaddik, which is referring to the Ze'er Anpin, is called the tzaddik, primarily the element of Yesod, which is the power to reproduce. And it's called Chai Almin, the life of all worlds, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tipas Yesod Zah, which is the drop of Yesod, that's Oyer Zarua, the light that it's planting is actually the seed, the seminal drop that it's delivering to create Nishmas Mashiach. Lahoyle, to give birth, Shaydish Klaus Nishmas Yisrael, the root of all Jewish souls. Shugam Ken Kolol, it also includes, it's Betzalmai B'Dmusa, it includes his entire self of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mikol Oiros V'Kelim the Zeir Anpin Aklulim Bay, is included all the Oiros and Kelim of the Zeir Anpin. Va'al Kain, and therefore we find that what? That Mispar Knesset Yisrael, what's considered a complete number of Jews? 600,000. Tov Reish Elef, 600,000. Because there's 6 Sfirot. So each one represents 100,000. Then Samach Riba Netzutzes, 600,000 souls, sparks. The Fisha Kol Mida Mavav Ktav is the Zah Mischalak Lameya Elef. Each one of the 6 directions of the Zeir Anpin divides into 100,000. So 600,000. So when does this birth happen? So it happened twice. The first pregnancy was before we were born. There was one level of pregnancy, and that produced what? The souls that went out of Egypt. But that over there it wasn't even. I'm not sure if that was a yichud between Zah and Shechina. It might have been higher. Chachma and Bina producing the Ze'er Anpin at that point. And the 600,000 Jews, that's the initial. And on the one hand, it's higher because it's souls in Atzilus, but on the other hand, it's lower because it's that level of divinity is not manifesting down here. It's still in a more, the godliness of their souls is not yet fully manifest in the world. Then came another pregnancy. When? It says when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, that was when the pregnancy happened. That's why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. It says when the legions that went to burn the temple went into the temple, they saw the cherubs even though it's talking about the first temple, but the idea exists also by the second temple. Second temple, there wasn't any kruvim, but the idea, concept. They saw the cherubs, the kruvim, that were in a state of intimacy. They were hugging each other, which embracing each other, which represents the idea that the cherubs were one male and one female. Represents HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekhinah. Why were they hugging it? Because there was an intimacy. From that intimacy started to create the future souls of Israel after Mashiach is born, all an offshoot of Mashiach Tzidkenu himself, who is the main neshama that's being born. And the Shekhinah is, and immediately that happens when she becomes pregnant, she goes into exile. Pregnancy is a time of exile and suffering. And then so it's a 2,000-year exile, a 2,000-year pregnancy, and then is the birth. And afterwards, first, it's there in potential in the seminal drop coming from the father, coming from the Zeir. But then, as we spoke, just like in Chacham and Bina, we said the drop then later becomes more developed in Bina. The same as in Zeir Anpin and in Malchus, that the seminal drop of the Zeir Anpin goes into Malchus, and over there it forms the entire structure of all the Jewish souls. It's called the female of Zeir Anpin. And when it's creating this child, again, it's all the Jewish people individually, every neshama, but there's one neshama koleles, and that's the neshama of Mashiach. And that's the neshama of Mashiach ben David. That's the ultimate expression of divinity in this world. And that's why Adam, what is being created? Only one person. But Adam stands for Adam David Mashiach. So the final and complete and ultimate manifestation of man is the neshama of Mashiach. And just like we know that all neshamas were included in the neshama of Adam, all neshamas are included in the neshama of Mashiach. And he's impregnant in Malchus. The whole zman hagolus and all the time of the exile. That Malchus is enclosed in the 70 ministering angels. Now he doesn't explain why when during the pregnancy, Dafka then is when Malchus goes down to suffer. It's like it's not enough that she's pregnant, she still has to be abused by the 70 ministering angels. Over here there isn't explanation. Other places I think it is explained, but not over here. So let's leave it for now. What the philosophy behind it is. Gets enclosed in the 70 ministering angels. The Seivelas Yesudei Shibud, and she suffers the suffering of enslavement. Like it says, Eisa Shashala to Adam ba'Adam. The time that man rules over man, the clipa rules over Kedusha. As the Shekhinah suffers away, Hinei Gam B'chinas Neshamas Mashiach ben David, so the Neshama of Mashiach ben David, HaKolul Ba Behelim, was included in her in a concealed state, Soivel Kala Yisurim, he endures all the endurances. Again, like mother, like child. He's suffering for 2,000 years, this neshama is suffering. Including the Mashiach represent, because in every generation there's someone whose potential can be Mashiach. So he suffers the pain even while he's in this world. He can be born in this world. Leidas Mashiach doesn't mean necessarily that he's not yet in a physical body, he is. But Leidas v'his galus Mashiach means that it's known to everybody. He's revealed. This is what Chazal say when they said, when they speak about the times of anger, which is the time of galus, they say like the time that you become impatient like a pregnant woman. The time of exile, because the pregnant woman suffers, and that's the time that God is in that state, the time of exile. Because she's suffering so much, she's also not in the best of moods. Like we know that a pregnant woman can be very moody. So there is a lot of, the Shekhinah runs the world, but there can be a lot of harsh decrees and a lot of dinim and all kinds of things because of the intolerance of the suffering. Nechazim b'malchus, which hold on to malchus. Ad zman aleid, until the time of birth. Sha'az, by the birth, nimtuku kal adinim. All the judgments are sweetened. Va'azu b'chinas gilui told us nishmas Mashiach. Then it's revealed the birth of Mashiach. Shenoila, that is born, v'yoytz, and he goes out, menehelim, from the concealed to the revealed. Okay, nemer gam Moshiach. That's why it says by Mashiach too, v'umechulol mipshaenu. He's suffering from our sins. Because we understand something. Even though we said before that the Shekhinah is in exile during the whole Golos, we understand that every time we mess up and we do things that are not good, like we learn in Tanya, we drag the Shekhinah more into exile. As we drag the Shekhinah more into exile, her pain increases. As her pain increases, her fetus also, who feels insensitive to the pain of his mother and himself is in this exile, also his pain increases. That's what it means. He's suffering our sins. Crushed from our inequities. Which is during the time of exile. Because her feet go down into a place of death. Like it says that we cause, in addition to the general decree, it could be increased through sins of people. Like it says, because of your sins, your mother was exiled. At the time of the redemption, as she gives birth, and then the suffering stops. It is known. So here's a deep mystical secret. And the pasuk, when it says, when Paro says to the midwives that when you're gonna, you see a boy, you should kill him. When it's a girl, you should let her live. So he says over there, you will see al havnoyim, which is the birthing stone where they would lay on when they would give birth. So over there, it's explained in Kabbalah, in Arizal. I didn't get a chance to check this up, but it says, he brings it on the bottom in Eitz Chaim, it says over there, at the time of the actual birth, there's a certain, the feet, the thighs become cold, b'shas leda. And that's indication of a retraction of life. Shenestalku, and now feet, the thighs are called netzach and hod. So spiritually what that means is, the powers of netzach, hod, yesod, that were alive and were energetic and flowing the whole time, nestalku, they go away. Harishonim, their first energy is retracted. V'nimshachem, and the reason for that is because there needs to be a new infusion of life. Netzach hod yesod, a new renewed energy. Chadash. Why? V'hainu. Mitzad b'chenes hamshachas toisvis oir me'ema ilol malchus. For Malchus to give birth, she needs an extra infusion of new light to be infused in her, dafka, and that causes a moment before that a certain lack of oxygen, a lack of life. And then after that is a powerful infusion. There's a disconnect and a new. Why does Malchus need a new light? Why can't she suffice with the old? Because the birth pang, again, what this means, again, this is vague something that we can try to make out of what this really means. But because the birth pangs that are happening by the woman, it seems like at the time of birth itself, the powers of the chitzonim that are, because it's their last licks, again, once the birth happens, they're gone. The whole power that the clipa has over kedusha is during the pregnancy. So it seems like as it's coming time to the birth, they become very intensified, and that's why the birth pangs are so intense, because there is this struggle with the chitzonim, and that's what causes chitzonim means extraneous forces. Forces of evil are very intense. Well, that's why it's described Chevlei, the Mashiach, as powerful powers that the wicked are going to do to the Jewish people, are going to bring terrible things, wars, and who knows what. Because this is, and it can also be spiritual infliction that happens right before Mashiach comes. So, in order to help out the situation, because the clipa is so big, his gabros is so strong, you need to fight back. Kedusha has to fight back with superpowers of its own. Malchus itself, the Shechina itself, doesn't have that power. She's weakened. She doesn't have the power to fight this fight herself. So she needs to call in, like the police when they're overwhelmed, they call in for backup, for reinforcement. So the Shechina has to call in powers from much higher to deliver heavy dosage of holiness to cause the clipa to back off. So he explained from where? From Bina. Because Bina is not susceptible to Yanikas HaChitzonim. This whole that the powers of Kedusha are vulnerable to be attacked and so on and so forth, are only to Malchus. Well, we said her feet go down to the place of Klipa. Bina is a protected place. Avo b'pchenes pnimi is Bina, the inner elements of Bina, ein sham yanika lechitzainim. Over there is no derivative of the chitzonim. Klal, kedu, as it is known, shenikra alma decheres. It's a protected zone. It's called a place of freedom. Yovel Leila, it's called the supernal Yovel, Jubilee. The Gam Nikra Yain HaMeshumar, it's called, wine has to be protected because it can be touched by a non-Jew and then it becomes non-kosher. The Bina is called wine that is protected, mimagenochri, from touch from the other. When it comes from Vir, when added light is infused in Malchus, from Bina, that helps the birth, and it chases the clipa away, and there can be a birth. God says to me, you're my child. Today I'm helping you be born. The revelation below, like will be explained. What does this mean? So could be, again, I'm just giving a little possible explanation. We know that in the last few generations before Mashiach comes, the struggle of the clipa to attack the Jewish people becomes immense. The whole idea that the Shechina is attacked. It's a spiritual idea in the higher realm, but it also manifests down here in each and every one of us. That means that the Hazohar tries to get Jewish people to sin, to drag us away. And take a look. The Jewish people survived in exile, remaining Jewish, true to God, until the last 100 years, when millions and millions of Jews were kind of assimilated. And that's pieces of Shechina, chunks of getting dragged into the klipa. So this is very dangerous. To fight this, what happened? We had new infusions of Pnimius HaTorah, the secret. Pnimius HaTorah is called, it's coming from Bina, from, like it says in Zohar. Zohar is called Zahari Allah. It was only revealed in the end of days. And Chassidus, which is the deepest secrets of the Torah. These are new communications, new levels of infusion coming from the deepest levels of the divine, revealing itself in Malchus. When it reveals itself in Malchus, the big tzaddikim get these insights, and this like the Baal Shem Tov and Chassidus and all this, and this gives power to the Jewish people not to fall into to be able to withstand and to push the klipa away. Without this new power infusion of light, and which paves the way to the birth of Moshiach. Because as we know, from the Baal Shem Tov and onward was already the beginning of the strength of the birthing process. But primarily in our generation. For that we need incredible infusion of deep Chassidus, which is and part of what the Rebbe, I think, was saying then, that we should learn Torah regarding Mashiach, which will help Mashiach be born, is to direct particularly light of Chassidus and of into Malchus. Again, that's my own thought. With all of this moving Prati Divrei HaMaimer, we'll understand the details of the Maimer Hanal. The Pirish from Gavois Asherenu. The call Shoydish Mashiach Lamaila, which is referring to the root of Mashiach above. Lamaila b'Shoydish Arisha, above in the first root. B'Bchina Zeiranpin, in the Bchina of Zeiranpin. Kishahu be'ibur bebina, when the Zeir Anpin is still in Bina. Again, in the Pasuk we're not even talking about this birth. We're talking about way before that. When the husband, which is the Zeir Anpin, which is the husband to Malchus, which we way before the Malchus is pregnant with the soul of Moshiach, way back. Gavoy Sasharena was talking about that even he is still a fetus in his mother, in Bina. The Zal Shama, the high give us lo yisparish Merosh, she doesn't separate from her son. Ki gam za nikra bein la'aba ve'ima. Zeir Anpin is also called a son to father and mother. And the second one, B'chinas ibur the klolos nishmas Yisrael, the ibur of all the Jewish souls, b'malchus, in malchus, emetata, the lower mother, b'tzalma yoked musay, which he creates in his image. The child that is included in the lower valley, in the future will need when Mashiach will come. And it's clear for the reason mentioned above. Moshiach and the birth of Mashiach. What does it say? That the higher giver will have to pick him up. And to lift him up, Goy got far under her wings. An added light Bina, from the innermost of Bina into Malchus canal. To infuse him so that he can be born with higher life. The Pnimi is Bina. Of Pnimi is Bina, Olam Achedos, the world of freedom, and from him, Yapik Bahu Yoima, Umina, and from her, Yapik Bahu Yoima will come out on that day, Mashiach of David, Mashiach of David, V'razadah, this is the secret of Al Sapra El Choik. As Sapra El Choik, which is the beginning of the pasuk, it says, I will relate so that it can be inscribed. Hashem Omar Alai, that God said to me, Bini Ata, you're my son, Ani Ayoim L'Tich, I've given birth to you today. What does this mean? So this secret is hidden over here. Asapra El Choik is the communication of Bina, which is called Sapra, like Sfira Sa'omer, Sapra, illumination. That's the lights of Bina that are illuminated. A Chok, Malchus is called Choik, as we're going to see later. Malchus is not today, I'm not going to continue this later. But Malchus is called Choik because she sets boundaries, and Chok means limits to everything. There is a Asapra, there is an infusion from Bina, El Chok to Malchus. For what purpose? Because Hashem Omar Elai, that's the impregnation of Havaya, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Omar Elai, B'niyata, Mashiach is his child of the Zeir Anpin. So for that we need Asapra El Choik. We need this effusion from Bina into Malchus so that so that I can give birth to you today. Zaman Anoloimar, I am preparing to say Lahu Asar de Ikra Choik, to that place that's called Choik. Ulavasrale, and to give him a besura. Bahu Yoima Mamish, and that day Yapik Le Metchois Katfa will bring out Moshiach from beneath its wings. Become a chayin with many powers of life, become a itrun with many crowns, become a berchon with many blessings. In a kavanasa, let's just read one tiny little bit further. In a kavanasa ledaktek bepirish apasik azeh, it's trying to explain with the meaning of this pasuk. Asapr el choik means the mashma sheyesh mi shemedaber umesaper. Someone is speaking and someone is relating. Who is the one that's relating? Ulemihu mesaper, and to who is he relating to? Lechok, to that level called choik. Pirish, what does that mean? The yesh asar de ikra chok. There is a level place that's called choik. Hainu b'chinas malchus tatzilus, malchus of atzilus is called choik. Shenikra choik, k'mosh hakasav ki choik li Yisrael. Yisrael is the Zeir Anpin. Chok li Yisrael, which we say Rosh Hashanah. Choik is malchus. Pirish Yisrael b'chinas Zeir Anpin. V'choik li Yisrael is his wife. Hu b'chinas malchus nukva dezah. The nukva de Zeir Anpin. Uksiv choik nasan v'lo yavor. Pirish asapra el choik. I will relate to choik. Hainu ke'inyan. This is the idea of isha mesaperes and baila, which is referring to. It says there's 3 parts to the night, and the Gemara talks about all 3 parts of the night. The first part of the night, donkey browse. The second part of the night, dogs bark. And the third part of the night, a woman speaks to her husband. So mystically, what does this mean? The night is referring to the exile. First 2 parts of the night referring to the tremendous suffering of the donkey and the dogs barking and all that suffering. Third part of the night is talking about from when according to the Rebbe Rashab explained, that is talking about a woman's talking to her husband is referring to the communication between the Shekhinah and her husband, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which they were separated during the time of exile. They start talking again. Why? Because he's now helping her with the birth. How is he helping her? He's revealing secrets from his mother to her. And what does that mean? These are the secrets of Kabbalah and Chassidus, which came in the last third of the night to prepare for the birth, for the morning. Misaperes and Bailo b'mishmar ashlishi in the third part of the night. New moichin that are drawn mize'er anpin. Again, even though it's coming from Bina to Malchus, it's going through the ze'er anpin. That's why the Rebbe says, learn the Torah of Moshiach. Who should learn? You Yidden, all Jews, because we are in many ways the ze'er anpin. We're simply helping the birth in the Shekhinah. La Malchus samach la boiker or towards the morning. Upidish hasapra zeh hainu loshen eves sapir. Illuminate. Shu b'chenes havakas or dafka. Illuminating light. To add an additional light, the boyer, mepnimiyas bina, from the innermost of bina, la malchus to malchus, to help the birthing. But when we hear this, we realize that the request that Rebbe was asking of us to learn in Yanegula Mashiach, Ezu derech yeshara, sheyiva lo yadam, to bring about the birth, and to learn Chassidus in general, but particularly to learn, is very serious. It's nogeya mamish to be a Mashiach. Al pi derech hasoid. It seems, again, that connection, that this is why the Rebbe was asking for it, again, is my own thought, but it makes sense based on what we're learning over here, and I'm thinking that it's true. I'm not sure. Now he's going to explain why Malchus is called Chayik, and further, and in the end he explains the concept of the unity between Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. It's too much for today. So Be'ezras Hashem, next week, Thursday, we're going to continue. And then the Maimer still, it almost seems like two Maimer blended in one, the second half. So I'm sure there's all kinds of good stuff. I didn't even get close to learning the second half. I did learn another page and a half. And this piece that's going to be in Agea, which is regarding this 33-day period, in order for the reincarnation of Moshiach, or resurrection of Mashiach. Okay. We shall see. Everyone be well. I hope there was some understanding over here, and you're not all lost. The main thing is that all this shouldn't just be Torah anymore, but it should we should see already the full birth and the full revelation and the full Al Inyanim. L'chaim l'bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Baruch